do I have?
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no coal. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
That's right, folks. From the mountains of Kentucky to the bayous of Louisiana, broadcasting online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studios in Huntsville, Alabama. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller. Today, an independent union leader is beating a GOP incumbent in fundraising for the U.S. Senate race in Nebraska. Derek Siedman breaks down the webs of elite connections in the anti-UAW campaign here in Alabama, and Vermont passes a state-level PRO Act, while the Alabama legislature does not that. All that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show today, we've got a phone number, and the line is open. You can call 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also leave a voicemail throughout the week, and we might respond on the next program. Really quick, right here at the top, wee woo, stop what you're doing. Go in your pantry, get a non-perishable food item, and leave it in a bag by your mailbox. Non-perishable food items will be collected by letter carriers at every single house in the United States today by letter carriers with the United States Postal Service, who are unionized with the National Association of Letter Carriers in urban areas and the National Rural Carriers Association in rural areas. This is part of the Stamp Out Hunger food drive that every year connects millions of pounds of food for needy and hungry folks in local areas. Right here in the Huntsville area, they collect on an average year over 130,000 pounds of food in one day. So they'd like to beat that this year. So really quick, stop what you're doing right now, because some of y'all who are listening have probably already missed your letter carrier, but most of you have not. Most of you, your letter carrier has not come by yet. So stop what you're doing right now. Get up, go to your pantry, get a non-perishable food item, put it in a bag, leave it by your mailbox, and donate to the National Association of Letter Carriers Stamp Out Hunger Food Drive. Today, Saturday, May 11th. Be a part of stamping out hunger in the United States and here locally. With that out of the way, if you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, you can find us anywhere you find anything online, in particular at our website, TVLR.fm. You can subscribe to our newsletter there, where every single week we will give you what happened last week in Southern labor, and Boss Watch, where we take a look at what bosses are up to in the South. It's not great. You can also make a donation one time or recurring monthly at tvlr.fm/donate, and you can buy a hat at tvlr.fm/store. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. And if you're a member of a union, your local or international union, your state council, etc., can sponsor the show. We are on now in 3 states on 4 radio stations. So a lot of folks who are listening are actually in the terrestrial area where we that we broadcast in. And if we're not in the terrestrial area that we broadcast in, then you can help us get on a radio near you. But if you're a member of a union, you can get your local to sponsor the show, and you can reach out to us for more details on that.
That's right, and let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. We welcome all of our listeners, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, Unclaimed Mysteries Internet Radio, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, WMMT, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check that out. And as most of you know, we are not media professionals, just a couple diehard union brothers who believe that the South's labor movement and working class deserve a bigger platform. We're hoping this project can make a difference on that front, and we cannot do it without you. So we want to thank everyone for tuning in. Whether you're a loyal fan or a first-time listener, we appreciate you spending some time with us this morning.
Absolutely. In the YouTube chat, Maxwell says, even if your letter carrier already delivered, put it out for Monday, and we'll get it where it needs to go. Maxwell, presumably a letter carrier. So thank you very much for that. So even for you slackers who missed your letter carrier this morning, you can still donate to the Stamp Out Hunger Food Drive. Make sure it's out, a non-perishable food item in a bag by the mailbox on Monday, and they will still get it where it needs to go. That is amazing. Letter carriers are great, and really appreciate what they do every single year during this campaign. Let's go ahead and get to last week in Southern labor. So here's what workers in the U.S. South and the American colonies were up to from May the 3rd to May the 10th. In new union campaigns, 14 workers at Dallas Black Dance Theater in Dallas, Texas, filed a petition to hold a union election with the American Guild of Musical Artists. 10 workers at Wells Fargo Bank in Spring Hill, Florida, filed a petition to hold a union election with Wells Fargo Workers United, CWA, as did 5 more Wells Fargo workers in Fort Myers, Florida. The employer filed a petition to hold a union election after a majority of the 29 workers at Generation Hope in Washington, D.C. demonstrated support for unionization with Workers United. 19 workers at Darling International in Bastrop, Texas filed a petition to hold a union election with Teamsters Local 657. Workers likely pushed by their employer filed a petition to decertify the Communication Workers of America, CWA, as the union, representing 53 workers at ADT Security in Lafayette, Louisiana. The employer filed a petition to hold a union election after a majority of the 35 workers at True Timber Arborists in Richmond, Virginia, demonstrated support for unionization with the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, IAMAW. The employer filed a petition to hold a union election after a majority of the 3 workers at Mid-Coast Radio Project in Kansas City, Missouri, demonstrated support for unionization with CWA Local 6360. 67 workers at KLS Martin Manufacturing in Jacksonville, Florida, filed a petition to hold a union election with an unnamed union at on the NLRB's website. 6 workers at All Crane Rental of Georgia in Phoenix City, Alabama, filed a petition to hold a union election with the International Union of Operating Engineers, IUOE, Local 312. 27,000 educators and other school workers in Fairfax County, Virginia, filed for union elections with Virginia's newly established Authority for Public Sector Collective Bargaining with the Fairfax County Education Association. That is going to be a huge win when they get their unions. In campaign updates, Mercedes replaced their CEO ahead of the union election in a bid to follow Governor Ivey's new tact of playing nice. Meanwhile, Pastor Matthew Wilson, a Tuscaloosa city councilor, is apparently being asked and performing for Mercedes, walking up and down the shop floor at the Mercedes plant in Tuscaloosa, encouraging people to vote no in the union election. Is he getting paid for this work? It's unclear at this time. Meanwhile, Alabama college football great Antonio Langham has come out in support of the union campaign, speaking at a pro-union rally last weekend. In election results, 43 workers at Trap Rock and Granite Quarries in Ironton, Missouri, withdrew their petition for a union election with the Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA, Local 829. 42 workers at Veolia WTS USA in Beaumont, Texas withdrew their petition for unionization with the United Steelworkers, USW. 23 workers at Liberty Communications of Puerto Rico in San Juan, Puerto Rico voted 10-11 against unionization with the CWA. 14 workers at Rogers Group in Hopkinsville, Kentucky voted 5-8 in favor of decertifying LIUNA Local 1392 as their union. Teamsters Local 688 withdrew their petition to represent 55 workers at Quest Graphics in Maryland Heights, Missouri, that are already represented by the Printing, Packaging, and Production Workers Union of North America, PPPWU, Local 6505M. 8 workers at Liberty Mobile, Puerto Rico in Guaynabo, Puerto Rico voted 8-0 in favor of unionization with the CWA. 9 workers at IMI Kentucky in Somerset, Kentucky voted 7-1 in favor of unionization with the Teamsters Local 89. And 650 Breeze Airways flight attendants nationwide voted 76% in favor of unionization with the Association of Flight Attendants, AFA-CWA. In settlements, grievances, and unfair labor practices, the UAW has filed more unfair labor practice charges with the NLRB against Mercedes, alleging that the employer has disciplined employees for discussing unionization at work, prohibited distribution of union materials and paraphernalia, surveilled employees, discharged union supporters, forced employees to attend captive audience meetings, and made statements suggesting that union activity is futile. This was not in the South, but has ramifications for Southern workers. A National Labor Relations Board administrative law judge found last week that the Atlantic Fire Protection Company committed an unfair labor practice last Christmas when it discontinued its holiday tradition of feeding employees with a roast, ham, and turkey in retaliation for union activity, among other violations. In strikes and bargaining updates, labor share of income continues to fall in the United States. Previously, workers earned about 2/3 of the income that their labor created. Today, it is barely over 50%. Linamar, a manufacturing plant in Hartselle, Alabama, is closing, laying off 152 workers. But the workers are not unionized, so they will not get to bargain over the conditions of their layoffs. You will also not hear about it very much in the news, and the story will not be brought up 20 years from now as an example of why total corporate control is bad. United Mine Workers of America, UMWA members in Birmingham, ratified a tentative agreement between the union and the Crimson Oak Grove coal mine that the union says includes significant wage increases, improvements to paid time off, with no changes to health care or benefits. The vote was 64.4% in favor. Warrior Met is still refusing to engage in negotiations. Daimler workers ratified the tentative agreement between the company and the United Auto Workers, UAW, by an astonishing 94.5%. Those are ratification numbers that you see for strike authorization votes. I've never seen, or no, I have. I've seen a couple of contract authorization votes that come close to that, but generally it's among small units. This is a 7,000 person unit at Daimler over 3 states. So those folks agreeing to the contract, 94.5% is huge and really indicative of the nature of the contract that they won. Teamsters General President Sean O'Brien and rank-and-file Costco Teamsters rallied yesterday in Norfolk, Virginia, in support of the union-wide initiative to organize and mobilize workers at the wholesale retailer ahead of national contract negotiations this year. The union signed the first national contract with the company in 2022, and Norfolk Costco workers voted to join last year. The Teamsters say they have set up a massive nationwide campaign to organize other Costco locations. DHL Teamsters, including some from the recently unionized facility in Kentucky, called out the alarming union-busting and anti-worker tactics of the global delivery and logistics giant during DHL Group's annual general meeting in Bonn, Germany, last week. In politics and legislation, after a rally by labor in Northern Virginia in a final bid to move the school board has continued to ignore labor and the community and unanimously voted to reject prevailing wages for construction of the Career Center. The Biden administration announced last week that coverage through the Affordable Care Act will soon be extended to DACA recipients, a move applauded by the Service Employees International Union, SEIU. 17 U.S. senators submitted a letter to the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee deliberating fiscal year 2025 funding levels for the Department of Veterans Affairs, outlining concerns over lack of funding. These concerns were echoed by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE, the largest VA union. In a statement, National President Reverend Everett Kelly said the VA is facing tens of thousands of vacancies across the country, and nearly all employees say that they need more frontline staff. Yet, the agency is moving forward with plans to eliminate 10,000 full-time jobs because of budget shortfalls, emphasizing the need for more resources. The 2024 Alabama legislative session is over. Some highlights: a bill requiring state agencies to acknowledge and respond to public records requests within set timeframes was passed and sent to Governor Ivey. There is no new ethics law, and gambling died, potentially for a while. House Speaker Nathaniel Ledbetter says he is not interested in even bringing it up in the next session. A bill to loosen child labor laws was passed, and a bill to remove incentives from employers who voluntarily recognize unions was also passed. That is it for last week in Southern Labor. If we missed anything, or if you want to subscribe and get this segment as a newsletter, then reach out to us at tvlr.fm/contact. You'll subscribe to the newsletter, and you can let us know if we missed anything and keep us in the loop in what's happening in your area. You know, some of this stuff is public. We can very easily pull election information from the National Labor Relations Board. We can kind of easily follow news as it relates to legislation across the South, although that is very hard, especially in states outside of Alabama where we are not located. But in particular, thinking of union affairs like internal union elections, internal officer elections, contract negotiations, things like this, it's very difficult for us to find that because a lot of times unions don't even make this kind of stuff public. Not for any reason like it's not they don't want it public, they just don't talk about it, right? So if your union is going through internal officer elections, if your union is beginning contract negotiations, let us know and we'll include it on the newsletter. We're going to be right back talking to Derek Siedman, a contributor for Truth Out, about his recent articles on the Business Council of Alabama and the myriad of connections between business and political elites in this anti-UAW campaign here in the state. Stay tuned, folks. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report.
Benefit Architects has proudly supported union members and union-made products for over 35 years. If you are a federal employee and an AFGE member, you're eligible for hundreds of dollars in money-saving benefits, including group life insurance, dental insurance, and AFLAC insurance. Additionally, if you're a union member but don't work for the federal government, you can still qualify for several of these money-saving policies. So give Tate Hure a call at 256-215-6769 for details and to enroll. Again, that is Tate Hure at 256-215-6769.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and family members are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough even to keep their jobs. We can fix this. It's time for us to find a way to close the health care coverage gap so that people can remain at work. Let's make this a priority. Let's close this gap and cover Alabama. To learn more and how you can help, visit coveralabama.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
I'm attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law, the name with proven results.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host Adam Keller. Folks, we've got almost 30 people watching us right now on the YouTubes and only 14 likes. If you have not liked the stream, please do so. Also, subscribe to the channel, all of that good stuff. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Jada and Denise, good morning. Joe and Mel on the Facebook chat have both already put stuff at the mailbox for the letter carrier's food drive. So thank you for that. If you haven't done that, if you're listening and you have not put food donations out by your mailbox, then please go ahead and do so. If you're listening to this as it is live on Saturday, May the 11th, you can also, even if your letter carrier has already come by, a letter carrier in the chat said you can still put food out by Monday, and your letter carrier will still get it where it needs to go, even if you get it out on Monday instead of Saturday. So that's great. That's I appreciate that. Notes. Before we get to Derek, really quick, I wanted to make sure to let y'all know about this guy in Nebraska. This guy in Nebraska, Dan Osborne. He's a union leader. He was president of a BCTGM local union who struck against Kellogg's back in 2021 in Nebraska. They were able to preserve 500 good-paying union jobs and fight against concessions and things like this that Kellogg's was asking for. He led that strike to a successful conclusion, and he is now still a union member. He's now a steam fitter, and he is running for U.S. Senate in Nebraska as an independent. Which is really exciting. And there is no Democrat in the race. So it is just independent candidate for U.S. Senate Dan Osborne, current union member, former union leader, against Republican Deb Fischer. And there's been some really, typically, in situations like this, the reaction to that among union folks is, isn't that nice for him? He's going to lose. It's going to be a blowout. But there are a lot of indications that he is a real serious challenger to Deb Fischer. He has already had one poll that had him ahead of Deb Fischer in a head-to-head race by 2 points. And in that poll, when that was just initially, no, you don't know anything else. Are you going to vote for independent Dan Osborne or Republican Deb Fischer? He's ahead of her by 2 points. But once they told the respondents to the poll a little bit about both of their backgrounds and their policy positions, Dan Osborne surged ahead by 15 or 20 points in this poll. So that's really exciting. Another poll came out recently showing him behind Deb Fischer just a couple of points. So again, this is a really interesting race in Nebraska. He also outraised Deb Fischer by 2-1 in the last fundraising cycle. I mean, that is just crazy. An independent, non-party aligned union leader outraising a GOP incumbent in a U.S. Senate race by 2-1. I mean, this is a very interesting race. Obviously we are we're a nonprofit. We're not endorsing anybody, obviously. But this is an interesting race. And if you're in Nebraska, you should look him up. You should look up Deb Fischer, and you should see what you think about both of those folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the outraising is really significant. Right. I mean, that is interesting. I'm curious to see how it plays out for sure. We did have Osborne on the show during our 32-hour live stream to support striking workers. Appreciated him coming on and his support for that effort. And it was interesting to talk with him. So, yeah, definitely a race to keep your eye on.
Absolutely. Derek Siedman is a researcher and Truth Out contributor. He joins us now. Derek, welcome to the program.
Hey, what's up? Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Really excited to talk to you. Derek, you've recently been on a tear writing articles about the BCA, the Business Council of Alabama, and their connections to the business and political class, and how that relates to the anti-union campaign here, particularly as it relates to the UAW and Mercedes and Hyundai. A lot of the information, for the most part, it's not just terribly hard to find. And a lot of it, some of it is not stuff that we knew, but some of it is stuff that Adam and I knew, being familiar with the BCA, running in, labor and political circles for as long as we have in the state, and being familiar with, chambers of commerce generally, right? But we never really thought to, I don't know. It just never occurred to us to put it out there in the way that you did. And I think it's worth doing. And because a lot of people don't know, right? A lot of people even think that a chamber of commerce is actually a department of a municipal government, right? I mean, there's just all sorts of misconceptions about these sort of organizations. So, let's start there. If you could explain to us what the BCA is.
Yeah, for sure. And again, thanks for having me. First and foremost, I have a background as a corporate power researcher. So I've done this type of research in other states as well. And I think it's always useful to look at things like the chambers of commerce to get really a sense of what the corporate power structure looks like. And the BCA, sort of on the surface, it might seem like it's a business association, a chamber of commerce. They lobby and have legislation that they push. But I think a deeper analysis of it really shows it to be a sort of a vehicle or nexus for sort of organizing and coordinating generalized corporate interests throughout the state of Alabama, and it's also the case in other states as well. So I mean, it does things like we'll fight against minimum wage increases, or push legislation around so-called workforce development or what have you, right? But I think with this campaign that it's waging against the union drive in Alabama, we're really seeing that it's sort of a sort of vehicle for class power, and you can see that by looking at the leadership of it. When I say the leadership, I'm really talking about the governance of it. There's a 135 member board of directors that governs the BCA. But in reality, in the day-to-day, it's a much smaller group that are the officers and the executive committees. And if you look who's in that small group, it's just over a dozen. You have the biggest bank in Alabama, the CEO of the biggest bank. He's actually, John Turner is the chairman of the BCA. You have the biggest healthcare company. You have, of course, the Alabama Power, the biggest electric utility, widely represented. And I can talk a little bit about that. You have not Jimmy Raine himself, the state's only billionaire, but his company represented by one of the top executives. So it's really a nexus of the most powerful people in Alabama. And so I think, when you see it that way, you can really, start to understand the BCA as a real sort of organizing vehicle for the ruling class in Alabama. And I think, we see right now that it's very sort of terrified in a kind of existential way over the auto workers unionizing in Alabama.
As you have researched, these sort of business amalgamations and organizations, have you ever found any hint from them that they recognize the irony of being an organized class, like an organization for the organized business class advocating against workers organizing? I mean, that's it. It just seems to me to be incredibly ironic, and obviously, it's only ironic if you kind of believe the pablum that they put out there, because obviously organizing collectively is to the benefit of the class that is organizing collectively. So obviously it's beneficial for business interests to organize collectively and have coordination and class solidarity and all of these things. It's beneficial for them to do that in coordination instead of as individual business entities, right? In the same way that it is obviously in the interests of working people to organize as a class in unions and in labor federations, so that we are not having to negotiate and advocate for ourselves on an individual basis, because we have less power there, right? And so have you ever seen any of these businesses individually recognize the irony of playing a big role in these sort of organized business entities, or the business entities themselves recognize this irony?
It's funny you ask that, because it almost feels like it's the air that they breathe, and they don't necessarily recognize that. And you can. I mean, I think that they're very self-aware. That they're sort of organizing to pursue their interests, but I think that they see their interests as the general interests. And now that they are, getting, a real force that is starting to punch back, you can see how terrified they are, because they've had, really kind of, more or less unchallenged, sort of unrivaled power. But it is funny also that you mentioned irony, and it made me think of something else. Also, there was, I think it was a week or two ago, where Kay Ivey, who, by the way, I mean, we can talk about her relationship to the BCA, and I know you all have talked about it as well. But I mean, in my opinion, she should almost be considered indistinguishable from the BCA, a virtual arm of the BCA. There's so many ties and connections there. But she had tweeted or quote tweeted something about the UAW being a dangerous leech and corrupt, and it's just really ironic to me because, first of all, she was, quoting a so-called news site that is actually owned by a consultant who works for the BCA. Some people might not know that, but we can talk about that if you want. But also, I mean, it's just like, if you look at the revolving doors between her administration and the BCA, I mean, she's got people high up in her administration that came straight out of the BCA. How much money she takes from the BCA, it's unbelievable. And if you look at the BCA itself, and just like, that chairman that I mentioned, John Turner, who's the CEO of Regions Bank, he raked in almost $40 million the past 3 years, and he's leading this, this group, the BCA, that's telling auto workers they can't even have a union. So I mean, it's just really, that's an irony to me too, that they, that she's claiming that the UAW is a leech, when in fact, we see how much sort of power and wealth and connections and revolving doors, are sort of swirling around her in the BCA.
Yes, and we have, so being a union radio program, we have folks who listen to us who have been in the labor movement for a long time. One of those brothers is Mel Sutton. He was he's a delegate to the North Alabama, or he attends meetings for the North Alabama Labor Council. He was formerly a delegate of the West Alabama Area Labor Council, retired member, United Steelworkers. Great guy. He wanted to remind folks that not that long ago, Kay Ivey was coming with her hand out to organized labor as a Democrat for support and donations and votes, right? And so that's just a very funny thing that is, any Alabama Republican over the age of 55, this is pretty much true for. And it's worth saying that. And so we'll stick on the Yellowhammer stuff for a bit, and then we'll go back to some of Kay Ivey's connections, because this is something that's also funny, and that I have known, and it's just, again, it's not something that I've thought to say very much, but it's worth saying, especially since one of the stations that we're on is a conservative radio station that is officially partnered with Yellowhammer News, and so I want to talk about that so that folks know that. And so talk to us about Yellowhammer's connections with the BCA and the GOP political class in Alabama. Pull on that thread for us.
Yeah. So, we could talk about it for a while. There's a lot of weeds to get into, but I think the sort of broad outlines of the story that you probably know well is that, Yellowhammer got started in 2011 by a guy named Cliff Sims. It turned out a few years later that it was owned or co-owned by some really prominent lobbyists. Two of them had been former executive directors of the Alabama GOP, and this got exposed when an independent journalist, Eddie Curran, got some leaked emails that he published, where basically Cliff Sims was kind of taking marching orders from one of these lobbyists over a commercial they were doing for coal, and I think there were some Alabama Power ties there. But the way that Eddie Curran described it to me when I talked to him is that he said, Yellowhammer, the conservative politics are kind of the bait, and it's really a pay-for-play operation. You do business with their consultants, their lobbyists who are behind it, and Yellowhammer, treats you well in its coverage, right? We can fast forward to a few years ahead now. In late 2023, it was the fall of 2023, it was announced that Yellowhammer was bought by a political consultant named Paul Shashi. And, my sense, again, I just started researching this stuff several, maybe a month ago. So, definitely would love to hear, if you have any, thoughts or insights or things that about Yellowhammer's, being in Alabama. But yeah, my sense is that Shashi, he's a powerful political consultant. He managed the Senate campaigns of both Katie Britt and Tommy Tuberville. He is a principal for this firm, SR Communications, that does, business really with the true heights of political power in Alabama, lieutenant governor, high up in the Alabama legislature and so on. So Shashi bought Yellowhammer News. He's a co-owner. There's another guy who's a co-owner who's worked for an investment firm. My sense is that he's probably the money behind it, but I don't know for sure. In any event, what was announced a few months earlier than that, in the spring of 2023, in just like one little announcement, right, was that the BCA had hired Shashi as a political consultant. The BCA announced it. They put out a press release. And so basically you have this situation now where Yellowhammer is, I've looked at it, I've been paying attention to it since I started doing this research. It's just, very consistently, a few times a week, putting out this anti-UAW articles, using very language that's kind of demonizing Sean Fain and the UAW. This is happening in a so-called media outlet that is owned by someone who's working for the main group that is sort of leading the statewide anti-union campaign. And of course, none of this is disclosed. Like in none of their coverage of the UAW or the union drive does it say, disclosure, our owner is working for the union busters, right, so to speak. And I actually emailed Shashi, I emailed Yellowhammer, I emailed the Business of Council Alabama. I wanted to get some comment from them. I wanted to know what was their disclosure policy. I didn't get any response from any of them. But last thing I'll say is that this is sort of I think an interesting thing that's related to the union drive here. But I think Yellowhammer, it should be understood as sort of part of the larger corporate political operation within Alabama.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. That's all totally right and tracks with my understanding as well. And just to show you how far, just as an illustration of how far the pay for play thing goes, United Launch Alliance is a business in Decatur that's in our area, and their machinists are unionized with the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. ULA is a big advertiser at the very least on ULA. On Yellowhammer News, you almost can't even open Yellowhammer News without seeing a ULA ad, which is funny because, what is ULA advertising exactly, right? The random conservative readers in Alabama are not going to be buying any products from ULA. The U.S. government buys rockets from ULA, right? There's no sense, it doesn't make sense, just as an expenditure. But there's constantly articles gushing about how great ULA's rockets are and all this. And that's true. They have 100% success rate, and that's, union labor, right? They never mention that. But Yellowhammer News obviously took a very strong anti-vaccine mandate stance. And ULA fired some dozen workers for not getting the vaccine. And whatever you think about the vaccine, I think, obviously people should have gotten the vaccine. I was in the trial for the vaccine, right? All of this. But the union fought the firings. And Yellowhammer never covered it, despite actually workers from ULA calling into this station asking for it to be covered, and it was not covered. We talked to folks from the union about it and, all of this. And so that just kind of goes to show you the extent, because there were other companies that fired people and they did not get the, that kind of, kid glove treatment from Yellowhammer. And so I thought that, that's just kind of illustrative of what you're talking about, the kind of pay to play way that they operate.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's go back to then, KIV and the BCA and this revolving door of lobbyists and money and campaign donations. What are some highlights from that, from those relationships and some of the things that you found?
Yeah. So also I should say, if people go and look at the first article I did that looked at the BCA for Truth Out, then I have some maps in there where I sort of have visual maps that show all the revolving doors and donations and things like that. If you want to get a look at, get a sort of visual sense of all this, but
great
job.
Oh,
thanks. Yeah.
I think it's really helpful to visualize and literally see like the dots connected and the connections there. So I really appreciate that. And I highly encourage people to check that out.
The title of the article is "Corporate Power Has Long Dominated Alabama. Auto Workers May Change That" by Derek Siedman in Truth Out. And then he has the article specifically about Yellowhammer's ties to the BCA and all of these. The title of that article is "Anti-UAW Media in Alabama is Owned by GOP Consultant with Corporate Ties." Okay, sorry. Continue.
Thanks. Yeah. So, we could talk about campaign finance first. So I looked at the, top donors to Ivy in the last full election cycle, 2021-22. And, 7 of her top dozen donors were, and this is including the number one, the big dark money that she was taking, but 7 of her top dozen donors were, tied to the BCA, and most of those like closely tied to the BCA. So for example, the BCA itself has given her around $400,000 over the past 15 years or so, just under $400,000. But another big donor was Alabama Power. They gave her $235,000. And I should say, Alabama Power, the thing I was most struck about by researching the governance and the leadership of the BCA is the way that it's dominated by Alabama Power. There's 15 executive and officer seats that are like the core leadership I was telling you about, and 4 of those have very close ties to Alabama Power. One's the CEO, Jeff Peoples, but three directors of the BCA are also directors of Alabama Power. And I should also say the executive director of Alabama Power, Helena Duncan, is married to someone who works for, I'm forgetting the name of the commission right now, but it's the main regulatory commission, right, of the utilities. And so, there's the BCA is really dominated by Alabama Power more than anyone else. And it's also interesting because sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, really quick. I think you said Helena Duncan was the executive of Alabama Power. I think you meant the BCA.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah. I meant to say, she's the executive director of the BCA. Sorry about that. Yeah. So I mean, one of the ironies about this with me is also that I noted in the article is that, in researching this, I read a report that said Alabamians pay some of the highest electric bills in the country, right? And so you have the same forces that are, profiting from having Alabama workers pay some of the highest bills in the country, that are also trying to prevent Alabama workers from getting a union, through the BCA. And I know Alabama Power itself as a company might have a different relationship to unions, but this is what is happening through the BCA. But in any event, so I mean, Alabama Power, Jimmy Rain, throughout the years has been, of course, one of her biggest donors, and I'm sure you've known this and talked about this. Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is also represented on the top leadership of the BCA, gave $150,000 to KIV in 2022, and the list goes on. And that's just the top dozen. If you go down further the list, there's other BCA board members, BCA executive committee members that have all donated to Ivy. So I mean, really, it's not an exaggeration to say that the BCA network is virtually funding Ivy, right? And propping her up. And it's doing that in other ways too. So for example, If you look at her administration, there's people that are very powerful in her administration, very high up, that come straight out of the BCA. So, for example, her director of legislative affairs, named Drew Harrell, is the former vice president of government affairs for the BCA. So basically a kind of lobbyist for the BCA. Went right into Ivey's administration as her director of legislative affairs, right? She has two deputy chiefs of staff, and one of them, named Nathan Lindsay, was also came straight out of the BCA, and he was the executive director of their PAC, Progress PAC, and that's the vehicle that they make all these donations through. So basically, I mean, to put this bluntly, he was running the operation that was funneling a ton of money to Ivey, corporate cash to Ivey, and then, after she wins, he jumps into the administration, right? And there's other people that I can mention that are now in the BCA that were formerly with Ivey, and it's not just Ivey too. As you probably know, right? The former Alabama Senate Majority Leader Clay Schofield stepped down last year to do what? To go work as an executive at the Business Council of Alabama. That's his job now, right? Katie Britt,
formerly the president.
Yeah. So it's really, I like I said, I've done a lot of this research, and I live in New York State. I'm in Buffalo, and New York State, there's a lot of revolving doors and everything. But this kind of tops the cake or whatever. Like this is a level of revolving door that I don't think I've seen between a specific group or network and an administration.
It really is kind of astounding. And, you mentioned Alabama Power, and Alabama Power does have a different relationship with unions than the rest of these companies in the BCA. And, generally they have a pretty positive relationship with unions and the IBEW and the AFL-CIO. But the effect on politics in Alabama leave a lot to be desired from Alabama Power. And if just generally, if you take a look at the Public Service Commission, it's not related to this fight with the UAW, but the Public Service Commission, their candidates, the commissioners are elected, and their campaigns are almost exclusively funded by Alabama Power and coal companies, which is kind of bonkers that, your campaign is being funded by the people that you're ostensibly supposed to regulate. That's wild. And, so then it kind of is not surprising that every time Alabama Power has asked for a rate increase since the 80s, there has never been a public rate hearing. Since the 80s. The 80s was the last time that there was a rate hearing on whether or not to increase rates for utility customers by the Public Service Commission. And, when you learn that Alabama Power funds these people to get on the Public Service Commission, you kind of like, oh, well, that kind of makes sense. So, as we wrap up, is there anything else that you think is really important for people to take away, as they're hearing all of this stuff coming from, particularly folks down in Tuscaloosa who work at Mercedes, folks in Montgomery who work at Hyundai? They're hearing advertisements. They're seeing people. They're seeing people advocate against the union. They're seeing preachers write op-eds against the union. They're seeing in Tuscaloosa right now at Mercedes, there is a city councilor who is a preacher who Mercedes has what's the word? Gotten to walk around the shop floor encouraging people to vote against the union. A preacher and a city councilor running around, as they're hearing all of this, and a lot of it coming from the BCA and from Yellowhammer News and these other conservative type outlets. What should folks know as they're hearing these anti-union messages?
I think first and foremost, you need to follow the money. You need to be aware that the network, the groups that are coordinating this anti-union campaign, these are billionaires and billionaire corporations. These are CEOs who rake in tens of millions of dollars. These are the most powerful people in the state, and they're used to really running things and having things, their way. And so I think that the union drive in Alabama, it's something that's, clearly really important for workers and improving their working conditions in their lives, auto workers, I mean. But I think it should also be understood as a sort of bigger battle that is challenging the power of these entrenched elites, these extremely wealthy and influential elites, corporate elites. And I mean, really, you see that in how kind of scared and terrified they are, and how much effort they're putting into just to stopping, a few thousand workers from getting a union. And so, I think that the union drive in Alabama, in the auto factories, is, it's on the one hand, it's a discrete union drive, right? But on the other hand, it represents a much bigger fight against, very powerful, very wealthy corporations and corporate interests that have been holding people down for too long, within auto plants, but also beyond that.
Awesome. Derek, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it, and thank you for your work again. The articles are on Truth Out. Corporate power has long dominated Alabama. Auto workers may change that is the first article, and the second is Anti-UAW Media in Alabama is owned by GOP consultant with corporate ties. You also did a video for More Perfect Union. You can check that out on More Perfect Union's Twitter page and YouTube channel. Derek Siedman, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
We're going to go ahead and head to a break really quick, and we're going to be right back to break down Alabama's legislative session. Mostly bad. Mostly bad is going to be the top line, but a little good, and we'll talk about both of those. Stay tuned.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and neighbors are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough to keep their jobs. We need to fix this. Let's close the health care coverage gap. To learn more, visit coveralabama.org.
Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Iron Workers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs, from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Iron Workers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
The Laborers International Union of North America, Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact Donna at their training center to start the process. That phone number is 256-415-7452. Again, that phone number is 256-415-7452. No experience is needed. Free training is offered, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is their mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
I'm attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law. The name with proven results.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host Adam Keller. We just finished a conversation with Derek Siedman from Truth Out about a couple of articles that he wrote about the anti-UAW campaign. Really good stuff if you're not aware of all these shady spider webs in Alabama politics, connecting all of the odious people, being like, oh yeah, all these evil people that I hear about in discrete conversation, in discrete instances, yeah, they're all connected, doing evil together. So that's a good place to find all of that information. You can check that. You can go back, rewind the stream, and watch it if you missed it on Facebook and YouTube, or you can wait a couple of days and we will have it out as a clip on its own. You can find lots of clips on our YouTube channel at the Valley Labor Report. We clip all of the segments, most of the segments that we do on the show. So if you don't have time for the entire show, you can. But you heard that we were doing a segment on something, you can search that on YouTube. Let's take a look at what bosses were up to in the southern United States and the American colonies last week. In Florida, this is crazy, for the third time in 5 years, a federal investigation has found that the operator of multiple psychiatric and rehabilitation facilities has had workers seriously injured or killed in violent patient attacks, including an employee who suffered serious injuries caused by a patient at a Melbourne location. The U.S. Department of Labor's Occupational Safety and Health Administration began an investigation into the November 7th, 2023 incident after Circles of Care Incorporated reported the worker's hospitalization 2 days after a patient used a metal hole punch to strike a mental health technician at a nurse's workstation in the head, face, hands, and arms. A second employee suffered a hand laceration as they assisted in restraining the patient. OSHA cited the company with a repeat violation for not providing a workplace free of recognized safety and health hazards, such as workplace violence. At its Sheridan West unit at 400 East Sheridan Road, the agency found Circles of Care failed to provide sufficient controls to prevent the escalation of acts of aggression toward professional staff. OSHA also issued a citation for an other than serious violation for the company's failure to report an employee's work-related hospitalization within 24 hours as required by law. Circles of Care faces over $100,000 in proposed OSHA penalties for these violations. The incident follows OSHA investigations into 2 other incidents in 2020 at the company's facility on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard in Melbourne. The fatal shooting of a counselor by a former Circles of Care patient in December, and on another occasion, an alleged assault. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimate the rate of non-fatal assaults on hospital workers at 8.3 per 10,000 workers, significantly higher than the rate of 2 per 10,000 workers in all other private sector industries. Based in Melbourne, Circles of Care Incorporated operates 10 facilities, including 4 outpatient locations providing behavioral health, substance abuse disorder, and other healthcare services. The company has a workforce of about 480 employees statewide. In Mississippi, this coming from AL.com, Another really wild case. The owner of a Mississippi Coast barber school and salon owes the federal government nearly $1 million after a judge found she knowingly defrauded the Department of Veterans Affairs by falsely claiming to teach classes to veterans and grossly inflating the cost for those who enrolled. The post-9/11 GI Bill provides educational assistance benefits for eligible veterans and members of the armed services who enroll in qualified education or training programs. The VA pays benefits for tuition and fees directly to qualifying schools and provides qualifying veteran students a monthly housing allowance and stipend for books and supplies. The U.S. Attorney's Office said Thursday that April Tucker Beard, owner of April's Main Attraction Salon and April's Main Attraction Academy, was found to have falsely claimed her academy provided 1,500 hours of class instruction to veterans and charged veterans on the GI Bill tuition of $22,000, while non-GI Bill students were only charged $2,400.
Wow.
Wow. Evidence showed Beard did not regularly teach classes. Most of the veterans on the GI Bill never received certifications of completion, and they did not take the state tests required to be a licensed barber in Mississippi. As a result of the fraudulent claims, Beard received $235,000 in payments for classes and training for veterans, which she never provided. Under the Federal False Claims Act, the U.S. government is entitled to 3 times the amount lost as a result of the fraud. A federal court judge in April ordered Beard and her associate businesses to pay the government $916,392. The post-9/11 GI Bill is an important part of our promise to aid our military veterans and their families for honorably serving our country, said Todd Gee, United States Attorney for the Southern District of Mississippi. This type of fraud drains funds from vital veterans programs, and this office remains committed to holding offenders who abuse and exploit these programs accountable. In Missouri, federal workplace safety investigators cited a Missouri roofing contractor for 21 violations for illegally exposing roof workers 5 times in 7 weeks at 6 Wentzville residential work sites to the dangers of fall hazards, the construction industry's leading cause of serious injuries and death. The Department of Labor's Occupational Safety and Health Administration opened its investigations after observing 13 Construction and Pro Services LLC employees to work on roofs without allowing its employees to work on roofs without required protection equipment at separate sites on October 31st, November 2nd, and December 14th, 2023. Specifically, OSHA alleges the company allowed employees to work without protections at heights greater than 6 feet, did not have a competent person inspect and evaluate job site hazards daily, and failed to train workers to recognize hazards or prevent falls. Inspectors also found 13 Construction and Pro Services permitted the unsafe use of ladders, did not ensure workers wore head protection, and did not require the use of eye and face protective equipment when using pneumatic nail guns. In all, OSHA cited the company for 26 violations, 6 willful and 20 serious, and assessed $258,000 in proposed penalties, continuing a history of similar workplace infractions that includes citations for 11 serious and 2 repeat violations since the company's 2021 incorporation. The company has contested the current citations issued. In 2022, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported over 1,000 construction workers died on the job. Of those deaths, 395 were related to falls from elevation. As part of the continuing effort to prevent fall-related fatalities in construction, the agency, industry and safety groups, and other worker advocates are encouraging construction employers and workers to join the 11th Annual National Safety Stand-Down to prevent falls in construction, May 6th to 10th. And finally, you're going to wrap up in Kansas, where on April 15th and 16th, 2024, the Kansas and Missouri Departments of Agriculture, in partnership with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, ordered 17 grocery stores in the Kansas City area to stop the sale and distribution of certain Fabuloso household disinfectants, as well as other disinfection products. The EPA says that the products were illegally imported into the U.S. and are non-compliant with federal law and may represent a danger to consumers. EPA and our state partners are committed to protecting customers from potentially dangerous pesticide products, especially in areas overburdened by pollution, said EPA Region 7 Administrator Meg McAllister. This includes taking swift action to prevent ongoing sales of illegal disinfectant products. According to the EPA, the illegal Fabuloso products contain an active ingredient that is not authorized in the United States as a household disinfectant because of the potential health risks, including throat and lung irritation, asthma and difficulty breathing, dermatitis, nasal irritation, sneezing, wheezing, burning eyes, and conjunctivitis. Joint state and EPA inspections that resulted in the stop sale orders revealed illegal Fabuloso products being offered for sale at multiple grocers in the Kansas City area that serve Hispanic communities. The unauthorized Fabuloso products had labels primarily written in Spanish. A U.S. version of Fabuloso with labels in English contained an approved active ingredient that is authorized for sale in the U.S. Some of the stores that were inspected were selling both the authorized and unauthorized products. Other violative products identified during the inspections and placed under a stop sale order include 48 Horas Prevención antibacterial Clorox, Clorox Ropa, Royal Pine, Pinal El Original, Cloralex El Rendidor, Axiom Complete, and Golden Essence Multi-Purpose Antibacterial Wipes. The stop sale orders issued to the grocery stores require them to remove the illegal products from store shelves and to cease all further sales and or distribution. So talking about legislative sessions and state legislators, state legislatures, we wanted to give you a little bit of good news before we get to the mostly bad news of the Alabama legislative session. And to do that, we're going to have to go outside of this southern United States and head to Vermont, where the Vermont House passed by a vote of 115 to 25 the Vermont PRO Act. The Vermont PRO Act already passed the Vermont Senate with over a 2/3 majority and now heads to the governor's desk with a veto-proof majority in both houses. That is astounding. That is really an amazing accomplishment for worker advocates in Vermont. In particular, the leadership of the Vermont AFL-CIO has to be applauded. The Vermont PRO Act, as of July 1st, 2024, will establish card check union recognition in the public sector. It will outlaw anti-union captive audience meetings during organizing drives in both the public and private sector. It will give the legal right of domestic workers to unionize, and it will also create a legislative study committee concerning the potential legal right of farm workers to also unionize. It is a huge step forward for Vermont's working people in allowing them to better unionize and advocate for themselves at the bargaining table. It's the signature piece of legislation advanced by the working class left United slate of the Vermont AFL-CIO. United has been in power within the Vermont AFL-CIO since 2019, winning 4 consecutive elections. And with the passage of the Vermont PRO Act in 2024, during the first year in office of President Katie Maurice and Executive Vice President Ellen Kay. It's a huge accomplishment in their progressive leadership and for the majority of the State Labor Council Executive Board. So with this landmark win supported by a large coalition, and this is from former Vermont AFL-CIO President David Van Dusen. He says, with this landmark win supported by a large coalition of union allies, including Teamsters Local 597, President Maurice and VPK have definitively shown that the labor movement can, in fact, build power separate and away from the Democratic Party and pass major legislation. Thus, we celebrate the historic Vermont PRO Act, the historic Vermont PRO Act has passed the General Assembly, along with many other victories achieved by United since 2019. Today, the Vermont working class has advanced their rights and gained more power to organize. Union, yes. So, yeah, really exciting stuff coming out of Vermont. looking forward to seeing similar things happen in Alabama.
Yeah,
where,
absolutely.
We're going to have a Labor Party governor in 2034. That's the plan.
We'll see. I mean, all we can do is try. But I'd love to see, some of the loopholes of the NLRA being addressed in that Vermont PRO Act. I mean, we'll talk a little bit in overtime about the NLRA and what it is, but really glad to see domestic workers and farm workers being, included. I think that's really important, to be inclusive in our movement, to be inclusive of all workers, even if workplaces look a little different. So that's really huge. Congrats to all the activists and organizers up in Vermont for this hard work. I know still got to get the governor's signature, but, with a veto-proof majority, you're in a pretty good spot.
Yeah.
I like it.
Absolutely. So with that good news out of the way, Adam, talk to us about Alabama's legislative session. It ended on Thursday, right? Thursday was Sine Die. Is that how you pronounce it?
Sine Die.
Sine Die.
Yeah. So it is over. Thank God. That is probably the biggest takeaway, is that it is always helpful when the Alabama legislature ends its session and can do no more damage. Much of the last couple of weeks of the session was focused around gambling. Folks may remember there was a big gambling package proposed early in the session. It would have included sports gambling, the lottery, and casino gambling at various locations across the state. There was some controversy immediately. There were very powerful groups involved with lobbying both for and against this. You had the Porch Creek Indians, Alpha Insurance, others, putting their 2 cents into the debate. And so when it was all said and done, gambling didn't happen. There was standoffs between the House and the Senate in the final week. Even in the final day, there was some standoffs and some Hail Mary attempts to try to get gambling through, but it did not pass. So, that was one of the things that dominated the session, particularly the second half of the session, after a lot of red meat bills early on. And so that's interesting to see. Here it is, yet another year where gambling will not be voted on by the people of Alabama. Whether you support gambling or not, whether you support the right to gamble or not, it's something that I think a lot of people are frustrated that they've heard these talks for so long. I mean, since I've been a teenager and was eligible to vote, I've heard debates in Alabama politics about gambling. There was a lot of people hoping to secure gambling for additional revenue for various programs. There was a lot of hot debate that final day. So the Education Trust Fund budget actually did not pass until the final day. It passed late that afternoon. There was some talks that maybe the House was going to hold up the ETF to try to force a special session for gambling, but they ended up backing down. There was a lot of noise about a COLA, a cost of living increase for retired teachers, retired educators. I give credit to the education retirees who did, speak up quite loudly, but they did not get anything. So that's interesting. That's another thing to follow. We've monitored the Alabama Education Association and their approach throughout the legislative session. So I know they went pretty hard on, retiree COLA. They were pinning their hopes to gambling, and, they got neither. So that's another takeaway from the session. The Education Trust Fund does have a whopping 2% increase for all employees. So
I think it's worth sitting with that for a second, because folks will remember that in the big school choice fight, school choice, quote unquote, school privatization, the AEA was officially neutral. That is how they recorded themselves. Officially neutral on a plan that will take $100 million away from public school budgets and funnel it into private school budgets, the majority of which will benefit children that were the parents of children who were already sending their children to private school and who are the vast majority of them wealthy, right? That's who this is going to be benefiting.
Long term, certainly, yeah. I mean, I know there's some language in there about the initial rollout and, you know, it's going to be phased in on income levels and all that stuff. But, you know, we know the truth about these programs nationwide.
Right. And so this, you know, they officially, and the implication, and I think it was made explicit in certain contexts and in certain rooms, I don't know how public the explicit saying of this was, but basically the theory was, if we give them this as the AEA, if we don't fight them on this, we'll be able to get something for it. We'll be able to get something for our members for it, whether that's a raise or COLA for retirees. They got nothing. I mean, a 2% raise is a pay cut. They got absolutely, unless I'm wrong, Adam, they got zero for their complicity in the destruction of public schools in Alabama. Is that right? They got absolutely nothing?
Well, I'm going to be looking over the next couple of weeks to see, you know, all the education bills that came through. Is there something there that they got that we can't see? But if we're just looking at the big picture of, you know, did you trade away your opposition to school choice in exchange for the pay raises? I mean, if that's all you got, you didn't get anything for the retirees, which you made a big priority of.
Right.
You bust down the retirees while we were down there, you know, lobbying for against SB 231. So yeah, I can't see it yet. We'll see. I mean, maybe there's something that I've missed. I'm going to be interested to see their post-session wrap up and kind of what they are talking about. But
well, and that's a good segue actually to SB 231, because there are some folks who wanted to take a similar tact to SB 231, which is, you know, the public opposition. You know, do we want to be too mean about it? You know, maybe let's work some back channel relationships, whatever. Let's use the process to kill it, and maybe we'll fight harder next year or whatever. It's just a very similar mentality, you know, like don't make too much noise, don't make people too upset or whatever. And in both of these fights, both of them, you know, I mean, look, which is not to say necessarily, at least that every person who wanted to take this tact is malicious in their doing that. I think that there are a lot of people who genuinely think that that is the best way to advocate for their members and the best way to get things for their members. But just on a factual basis, not you know, stirring the pot on SB 231, the bill to remove incentives from employers who voluntarily recognize their unions, that passed. And largely, you know, there was a little bit of pushback from some sectors of the labor movement, but it was not huge, and it was not, uniform in the opposition to it. And it passed. And it passed despite the fact that the person who put it forward is, I am told repeatedly, a pariah in the state Senate, Arthur Orr. Apparently, I'm told over and over again that people don't like him. And I was actually told that somebody high up said that, because Arthur Orr voted against the gambling bill, there's no way that his bills are going to pass this session. Well, they did. They did. And I was told that in order to say, like, you know, don't worry about it. It's not going to pass this year because it's Arthur Orr's bill, and everybody hates Arthur Orr, and he voted against gambling. So, you know, they're going to kill it to spite Arthur Orr. That's what some people were saying. And so they were saying, you know, don't worry about it too much. And obviously that didn't happen. Right? And so, you know, this is just, it passed. It passed the House and it passed the Senate. And now it's at the governor's desk. And it's a bad bill. It's a bad bill. And so, you know, it really should call into question this strategy of playing nice with these people and, you know, not hurting their feelings and stuff like that. You know, like, is that a strategy that's going to work going forward? And it's, you know, to be fair to the advocates of that strategy, it's not as if that strategy has not worked in the past. AEA has been able to do that. They've been able to fill enough coffers of Republicans during campaign season to get the Republicans on their side in a lot of these big education fights, right? But folks like myself and Adam have been saying for years, There is a sell-by date on that strategy. You will not forever be able to control Republicans by playing nice with them. You have to, at some point, exert power, and the AEA has never made any indication that they are going to be doing that. And we've been saying this is going to happen. We've been predicting it like Jeremiah. We've been saying, I mean, for years. And it's not just us, obviously, but for years we have been saying this strategy by the AEA and, folks like them in the State House has a sell-by date, and that sell-by date has come and gone, and it came and went this session in 2024. So between now and 2025 legislative session, the leaders in the AEA and the folks who are advocating these types of play nice strategies, we need to come up with something different.
Right. And, I agree with you that relying on palace intrigue is no substitute for mass organizing. I mean, bottom line. And we have to educate folks. We have to educate and instigate and agitate and get them engaged and get them involved and have mass opposition. People power is the only way we win down here, right? Because we talked this morning already about the extreme wealth, the powerful elites who dominate this state. They have media, they have lobbyists, they have law writers, right? These bills are written by their team. They have extensive networks on their side. So people power is the only way we can fight back. And, it's unfortunate that we suffered some really tough losses this session. 231 is a big one, but there were others, the school choice. That is huge. Early in the session, we took a lot of hits. The restrictions on absentee voting rights, SB 1, it's a terrible bill. There were others. Let me just tell you a couple of good things that happened, since there was some good news. We mentioned it in Last Week in Southern Labor, but there was finally some Open Records Act reform, something I've been pushing for a really long time, ever since I first engaged with the Open Records Act and had to do some public records requests and realized what a joke our current law is. So there will finally be a little bit more teeth to that law, which is good. Summer EBT was included in the final general fund budget, along with funding for Double Up Bucks, which is a program to help folks get fresh fruit and vegetables. But there was a lot of consternation around the summer EBT program. It was way more controversial than it should have been to feed hungry children during the summer months when school was out of session. So it was really... that was a good win, and I credit a lot of advocates who got involved with that. I mean, there were thousands of people who contacted their legislators around that issue, so good work there. And another win, SB 119 by Senator Stewart, that increases penalty for child labor violations. Really glad to see that. Neither of us are big fans of, criminalizing behavior, but when it comes to bosses, it's a little different story. And that's good also because child labor laws were loosened up. 14 and 15-year-olds will now have an easier time getting in the workforce because school permits have been removed.
Was there ever an amendment to say that parents have to consent to employment?
I have to go back and see the final text of what passed. There was a House version and a Senate version. And
I don't remember either version ever having. I remember there was a reporting requirement put in one version of the bill that said you have to, if you employ a 14-year-old, you have to send a letter to the person's home address or something, right? Which obviously there are no loopholes there. Obviously that's going to get to the parents, no doubt about that. But I never saw an amendment that would require parental permission. I never saw that.
Yeah, so we'll look and see what amendments made it into the final text. There's some other stuff going on with the legislature. Alabama Rise is going to hold a legislative wrap-up webinar on the 28th, that evening at 6 o'clock. So go to alarise.org. Check that out. That'll be a good way to get a wrap-up of the legislative session. We'll be continuing to cover it here on the Valley Labor Report. I know we're running out of time, so I did want to also plug real quick that there will be a party today, a solidarity party for the working class, 4 to 6 p.m. Central Time at Brock's Gap Brewing Company in Hoover. And this is from More Perfect Union, alongside the Alabama AFL, the Machinist Lodge 291, CWA 3902, free barbecue, kids activities, live music, something special for the moms ahead of Mother's Day. So that's happening this afternoon if you want to make it out.
All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for us today on the Valley Labor Report. Find us on YouTube and Facebook. We're going to continue the show. If you don't, we'll see you next week. All right, that is it for us. We are off the radio now. Appreciate everybody. Appreciate everybody staying tuned. Yeah, folks, we got a great overtime lined up for you. We have Jeremy Kimbrell, Mercedes worker and UIW union campaign leader, going to be talking to us about the campaign and the final stretches. Really excited for that conversation. He's bringing on another worker with him to talk to us. Said something of a warning. He's like, he's even more country than me, if that's okay. Yeah, hell yeah, brother.
Of course.
Yeah,
we love
so
all kinds.
Love it. And then we're going to be doing a little bit of education around the NLRA. I want to spend some time talking about Bernie Sanders' re-election campaign and the problem of organizing. I think that's there's a real problem there that is being demonstrated by Bernie running for re-election. And we're going to be talking about some other stuff too. So make sure you stay tuned for the second half of the show. We're going to take a break really quick, and then we're going to be right back with that second half of the show. We would take a phone call at the top of overtime if you want to call in right now, 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857 if you want to call in. Otherwise, we'll see you in just a few minutes.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
back. Welcome back. You are still listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host Adam Keller. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. If you haven't liked the stream, then please go ahead and do that. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. You can, if you would like, make a one-time or recurring monthly contribution at tvlr.fm/donate. You can also purchase our hats, our logo caps, tvlr.fm/store. No callers at the moment, so the National Labor Relations Act is the law that basically sets out the labor relations regime in the private sector in the United States. So there's a lot to know about the Labor Relations Act and a lot to know about what it doesn't cover. So Adam, talk to us about what should people know about the National Labor Relations Act as it relates to, their rights on the job, their ability to organize, how they should interface with their employers, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So the NLRA, it's also known as the Wagner Act. It was passed back in 1935. So, as you said, it is like the system. It sets up the framework for how labor unions operate in the private sector. And notice I said private sector. So one of the things that we ask in this movement a lot, and it's already been discussed a lot today on the show, is, how do federal and state policies either limit or expand workers' rights to form and join unions? We talked earlier about Vermont and the Vermont PRO Act and how that's actually expanding unionization rights. But we also mentioned SB 231 here in Alabama, which removes incentives from companies who voluntarily recognize their unions, which in effect forces the employees to go through the NLRB election process. That election process was actually set up by this framework, the NLRA. So 1935, when this was passed, was actually when most private sector workers first gained their legal protection to organize and bargain a union contract. Obviously, we had unions for decades before then. In fact, the first trade union that I'm aware of that formed in the United States happened when George Washington was still president. So unions have been around for a while, but in terms of actually getting a legal recognition and a framework for how these should operate at the national scale, it wasn't until 1935, of course, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed that law. It was one of the signature achievements of the New Deal. We saw during the 1930s a massive upsurge of labor organizing during the heights of the Great Depression, and this mass movement of working people helped propel these significant reforms of the New Deal era. So 3 things to know about this federal labor law, the NLRA. Number 1 is that it did have a transformative effect on the economy. Private sector union density tripled in the first decade after the law was in place. Now, if you check some of the history, and I'm currently reading The Southern Key by Michael Goldfield, and he's one of the historians that thinks that maybe the NLRA gets a little bit too much credit, and that, the law itself maybe is not the sole reason or even the primary reason why there was such a jump in union membership after it was signed. And so some would argue that these conditions were already in play, right? There was already massive organizing happening. So it wasn't so much that the law caused the organizing, but the organizing was happening and, in fact, helped cause the law. Regardless, right, it took the shackles off, and it did allow unions to go out to the mines, to the factories, to the workshops, and say, the United States government says you can have a union. President FDR says you should join a union, right? And that's huge. And so it's certainly better when you can get at least neutrality out of the state, as opposed to the fierce opposition that unions had encountered for so many decades prior. So that was the first big thing. It tripled union density in the first decade. But the second big thing to note is that it excluded many folks. Again, this is 1935. This is during the Jim Crow era. Many of the Southern congressional representatives and senators are very much beholden to white supremacy. They may have been Democrats, and so technically in the same party as FDR, but that doesn't mean they had the same ideology per se. And so to get this bill passed through the Congress, there were a lot of loopholes, and it excluded many black, brown, and women workers through occupational carve-outs. It just so happened to exclude domestic workers, which were disproportionately black women. It excluded agricultural workers, disproportionately black and Hispanic workers. It excluded the public sector. So healthcare workers and teachers and others were also excluded. So predominantly female professions. So those were big loopholes in the law. So for all of its, huge achievements for so many workers who were in the private sector, certainly folks were left out. And then the last thing to know is that the NLRA, as written, the Wagner Act, was really only in place for a dozen years or so. It was significantly weakened in 1947 with the passage of the Taft-Hartley Act, and it has been whittled away ever since, really, through various means. But the Taft-Hartley Act was such a drastic weakening of the law as to almost be a replacement of the law and not really an amended version of it, in my opinion. And the Taft-Hartley Act passed pretty overwhelmingly. In 1947, there was a anti-labor backlash right after the World War II, and the business class organized hard and saw the growing power of the union movement. They saw the way in which unions took advantage of this NLRA throughout the 30s and 40s, and they struck back, and they fought back hard. And so the Taft-Hartley Act is what we live with today. And if you ever hear union folks talking about the need to repeal Taft-Hartley, now you know a little bit why, because it banned quite a bit of permissible activities under the original NLRA. And something else to mention is that those exclusions to the NLRA, the Wagner Act, also extended to the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, right? So the NLRA sets up the rules for labor organizing and dealing with unions. The FLSA is what set up the regime for minimum wage, overtime, those sorts of things. And so those same exclusions of black and brown and women workers were also applied to the Fair Labor Standards Act. And you can actually go back and look at some of the debate from Congress, and you can see Southern legislators, such as Florida Congressman James Mark Wilcox, talking about how fundamentally they did not want the U.S. government prescribing the same wage for black and white workers. That you can't put black and white workers on the same basis and, quote, get away with it. So most of these exclusions and weaknesses are actually still with us today. And that leaves a lot of this up to states, and for states to, close some of those loopholes, which leads us into a problem, right? Because for every Vermont, there's an Alabama. So who got left out? Those folks continued to organize, and some did win legal bargaining rights later in the 20th century. For example, the letter carriers and other postal service workers were eventually able to win their unions, win collective bargaining rights. We also saw, Dr. King in his very last campaign was in Memphis in April 1968, supporting striking sanitation workers. And there was a wave of public sector organizing throughout the 60s and into the 70s. It was sort of infused with the spirit of the social movements at the time, civil rights and the women's movement. We saw the United Farm Workers and farm workers out west, particularly in California, organize and win some rights eventually. Teachers, it varied by state. Teachers in California won full collective bargaining rights. Teachers in Alabama, Mississippi, predominantly southern states, never did achieve those collective bargaining rights. And so those loopholes still stay with us. There are still millions of workers in the domestic sector, the agricultural sector, and the public sector who do not have the same union rights that the traditional private sector employee has. And that's unless state or local governments take some action, or there is a change to the law at the federal level, which seems pretty unlikely given the way Congress has operated in recent years. We saw a big push for the PRO Act, still has not been signed. The PRO Act would address some of those weaknesses in the Taft-Hartley, but, you know, here it is, 2024. Biden's facing re-election. We're at the end of his first term. We still don't have the PRO Act. So that leaves a lot up to the states, up to local governments to, you know, address some of this, to expand collective bargaining rights. But that's where we're at. It is a big deal that we won the NLRA in 35, but it's also a big deal that it was so weakened in 47 and left so many folks out, particularly in a racialized and gendered way. So that's sort of where we're at now. If you work in the private sector, you are subject to the National Labor Relations Act by and large. You know, obviously there are independent contractors and other situations that don't apply, but most of you listening probably do fall under the NLRA. So it's worth knowing a little bit of that history, kind of where it came from, some of the holes in the law. But at the end of the day, it does guarantee certain rights to organize, to have concerted activity, and to come together with your coworkers to try to organize a union, to join a union, and to ultimately negotiate a successful contract. So there's some regulations there on both sides. It's got some weaknesses, but that's the law we have until and unless we organize to make it a hell of a lot better.
Thank you, Adam. Have we got Jeremy and another worker from Mercedes on the line in the Zoom now? Fantastic. So everybody knows the Mercedes union election with the UAW is the talk of the town. That's what everybody's talking about. That's what has got the BCA and the political class in Alabama just running around, scared, crying, all this kind of stuff. I imagine that, these folks are just like wailing in a fetal position every night, like, so we wanted to, in the final week, this is going to be our last show before we know the results of the election. The election is going to be May 13 to 17, Monday through Friday. It is going to end Friday morning. So by Saturday morning, by this time next week, we will know whether or not they have voted to unionize. So we wanted to talk to some folks from the facility today to give us some of the inside scoop on what's going on in the facility in the run-up to the election. So Jeremy, thank you for your time. Jeremy brought along another worker, so if you could introduce yourself and welcome to the program.
Yeah, I'm Jeremy Kimbrell. Randall, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Randall. I been there 20 years.
Randall, Jeremy, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. If you could, Jeremy, can you remind folks of some of the reasons that y'all are wanting to unionize? Because one of the things, and I think they have kind of moved away from this, but one of the initial responses to the union campaign was that you don't deserve better, that you've got it great already, that there are no problems, and you don't deserve any more because you got it so dang good right now. What were the reasons that you wanted to organize?
Yeah, pretty much because of where we live here in Alabama. They just kind of treated us like, you ought to be lucky to have a job. And, they would give us less money than we deserve compared to the big three, even though we're Mercedes and build $100,000, even $250,000 luxury vehicles. And just because we're down here in Alabama, they say, you're well paid for the area. And they had also introduced a 2-tier pay scale where the new workers made $5 an hour less. Since then, since the union campaign, they did do away with the 2-tier pay scale, gave all the workers a $2 an hour raise. But we've been here before. I mean, we've been 5-6 years with pretty much no raises, and our insurance gets more expensive every year. Did away with retiree insurance. So, what kind of a place is this going to be to work in the coming years and for the next generation if we don't take a stand at some point? We just won't treat it fair.
Right. Right. And so that's been kind of, you mentioned that there's been something of a raise since the campaign started. They also fired the U.S. CEO for Mercedes, and they've got a new guy in there. And that is kind of representative of the broader shift in strategy from, I think, both Mercedes and, I don't know how much Mercedes really leaned into the you don't deserve better, but that was really part of the BCA and the politicians campaign at the beginning. But now there is more of a shift from both Mercedes and the politicians to say like, oh, you're right. There are problems, but we're fixing it. You don't need to organize. Look, we got a new CEO. He's going to be great. How have workers in the factory in the shop reacted to these changes? Have they made some workers more reticent to unionize, or have they emboldened workers and said, look, this is what I'm getting with just a talk of a union. Imagine what I can get if I actually unionize. Randall, what are folks saying?
Folks are saying, well, why 2 weeks? Why didn't they do it 2 years? If they truly cared about us, they could have done it 2 years ago instead of waiting 2 weeks before the election and stuff. It's persuading some. They want to give them a chance and stuff, but most of them they're not buying it.
Right.
They know it's just a trick.
How have folks been reacting to Matthew Wilson's interventions recently?
They're taking it as it's very odd to do something like that. I just had to scratch my head on that.
Yeah, just for folks who weren't listening earlier in the program, we didn't spend a whole lot of time on it, but we mentioned it briefly. City councilor and preacher Matthew Wilson has apparently been seen on the shop floor talking to people, asking them, "Please don't vote for the union, please." So yeah, I agree, Randall. I think that's kind of odd. That seems strange. Jeremy, what about you? How have folks been reacting to Wilson or to any of these other things? That Mercedes has been doing, and the commercials and the website and everything from the BCA and folks like Governor Ivey and things like this. How have folks been reacting when you've been talking to them?
Yeah, so it's all a different thing. Governor Ivey has her impact has been negative for her and for Mercedes. The BCA has had no impact, just like Governor Ivey. People are on to the deal where the people in power trying to control those who actually do the work. So that didn't benefit Mercedes at all. Firing the CEO, it had some people reconsidering, but what I told them is I've had 6 or 7 CEOs, and then I named the most memorable thing that each one did. And the most memorable thing that each one did was negative. Either forced workers out, the next CEO didn't bring them back, the next CEO no raises, told people if they wanted raises they could volunteer for overtime, and the last CEO introduced 2-tier pay. And all of them had some, when they came in the door, they all had some benefit that they offered that was kind of their, look what I can do. But it never lasts. It's all about making the most profits with companies. And this one has shown that the goal is to send as much profit back to Germany and the shareholders as possible. So while some people, primarily it's the anti-union folks that are saying give the new guy a chance, it's having some impact on those in the middle, but overwhelmingly our supporters are sticking with it. So, you know, if you're a betting man, put your bet on unionization.
There you go. Well, that's what I would do if I was a betting man myself. You know, that's interesting that is interesting that your perception is that actually the BCA and the Ivy campaign has overall been negative insofar as it relates to, you know, their goal of persuading people not to unionize. It's had the opposite effect, if any, which is, you know, to push people towards unionization. But that hasn't always been the reaction to, you know, political elites and folks like this intervening in these elections. You know, at Volkswagen in Tennessee, there was a huge full court press by, you know, the governor and other politicians in Tennessee to encourage people not to unionize, and it worked that time. What would you say what is the difference? Why did it work then and it's not working now?
Yeah, a lot of our new workers came in under that two-tier pay regime, and it's not like we suddenly decided that was a bad idea. We thought that was a bad idea from the go. So when you have workers that's been there 20 plus years, and they see, you know, a new generation coming in that could be their sons and daughters, and for no reason, profits weren't a question. They were overflowing. And they said, we want to pay these workers less. Well, that says two things. The one thing it says is really we've decided that we really are overpaying our workers that have been here a long time. And then we're saying, you know what, we really don't value what you new workers are bringing to the table. So we're going to pay you less. And even though they threw some money at us this year, you know, let's just say, okay, the workers believe it and say, okay, we're voting 100-0 to not have a union. And then you look at the history of the company, and if we go years without a raise, or if our insurance continues to get worse, or we have no real retirement, then what did we really gain? Nothing. We lose every year. So what we know is we know our company, and for the most part, most of us know we can't trust them. You know, we just got to trust each other that we've got each other's best interests at heart. And so we'll unionize the plant, and then at the table, based on the power of the profits of the vehicles we build and the strength of the workers at the plant, we'll get a good contract.
Right.
That's right.
You know, Jeremy, one of the funnier things I think that I've seen Mercedes do is the UAW put a picture of this out on Twitter. There are signs, big banners on either side of Mercedes gates as you're going into the plant, and on the outside it says "Your vote matters, vote," and you know that's all it says. And then on the inside it says "Vote no" on the union. Has that kind of struck people as strange that they don't want to send the same message to the folks inside the plant as the folks outside the plant? Have folks noticed that?
Yeah, they noticed it. It didn't strike anybody as strange. Mercedes has been lying for months now about what they're doing inside the plant. People that's been around organizing 25, 30 years have said this is the strongest anti-union campaign they've ever seen. Mercedes is a liar. They lie every day. So nobody was surprised. We thought it was pitiful. And actually, yesterday, I don't know who got to them, but somebody made them replace those signs. Now the sign on the inside the gate says vote also. They took down the vote no signs, but you know, it doesn't matter because every morning everybody's made to watch a video that says vote no on the TVs all day long. It's vote no. They're mailing stuff to our house, vote no, sending text messages to our phone, vote no. So, you know, it's everybody knows what Mercedes' position is, and you know, it's up to the workers to decide.
You know, Randall, as you've been having conversations with people about the union campaign and you know, encouraging people to support the union campaign, what have been some of the common threads that you have heard from other workers there about why why they've been convinced to support the unionization effort?
Well, I mean, we all have one goal: to make this place a better job. Mistreatment, we have all in common. Group leaders' discretion and family life. It's just the conditions that we're working in is just unreal. That's some of the common grounds that we have. You know, we done away with two-tier pay by speaking out, but there's so much more that we could get unionizing.
Right. And, you know, you being a 20-year employee, that's been something that has struck me about this campaign, is how many folks who have been there a long time are at the center of this campaign. Because, you know, when you talk about two-tier, you know, the folks who have been there for 20 years have it, you know, pretty measurably better than folks who are coming in right now, right? And so there are a lot of people who would kind of say, you know, look, I've been here for 20 years, maybe I'm only 5-10 years, maybe 15 from retirement, you know, I just want to coast on out, I want to, you know, I've got my tier 1 benefits, I'm not going to worry about everybody else, things are good for me, and I'm satisfied. Why is it that in this campaign there are so many people who have been there for 10, 20 years who are leading the union campaign?
They watched it deteriorate, and when we leave, we want it to be better than what we left it. We've been there and just see things go down south, and it's not all about us. It's about the younger generations, and what do we want to leave behind? We want to leave it in a mess, or do we want it to prosper in the future?
For folks that you've been talking to during this campaign that were on the fence but have ultimately decided that they are going to support, or maybe for folks who have not supported previous campaigns, what has been the thing that flipped them from a no to a yes, or from undecided to a yes?
They just got tired of it. They knew what was going on. They seen that nothing's going to change.
Volkswagen workers in Chattanooga, you know, I mentioned that there's been a couple of failed campaigns there, but they just won really bigly, as some might say, 70-something% in favor of the union. And the UAW recently put out a really powerful video. It's about 3 minutes long, so it's a little long for a clip, but I do want to go ahead and play it because it's such a powerful video. So I'm going to play this, and I'm not sure if y'all are going to be able to hear it. Ben, if you could get it to where they can hear it, that'd be great. But I'm sure y'all have seen it already. But I'm going to play this and let folks hear it because it is so good. And then I want to come back to y'all and talk about your reaction and your coworkers' reaction to the Volkswagen workers' win in Chattanooga. Let's play this clip.
You know, one standing alone can be bowled over. But you got a multitude together as one. You're not going to move that. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. United we stand, divided we fall. And that's one thing we have to guard against in this union drive. Be truth tellers. Face the fear. And you know what fear does? Well, fear destroys and causes you not to act when you should. But you know what? Faith goes beyond fear. And you look for the light, the facts, the truth. That's what emboldens you. That is the very DNA of this nation, is the ability to act on truth. Because at first in our hearts, when you have liberty in here, you'll be able to build liberty out there amongst the people.
feeling really great. Feeling really great.
On the radio or as a podcast. This is video from the Union Hall as Volkswagen workers are watching the vote.
We're gonna win. It's just how big we're gonna win.
Hey, wait! You're going to work? When you get off shift, you're going to be in a union. Yeah!
12 and a half years of fighting for this. Now, we need Mercedes. It's time the South steps up.
Y'all hold your head up high. Just know that y'all made history today, and it's a beautiful thing.
Many of the talking heads, the pundits, have said to me repeatedly, you can't win in the South. But you all said, watch this. And as Matthew 17:20 states, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. Are you ready to move another mountain? Tonight, we celebrate this historic victory, and tomorrow we go to fight.
Domino just fell, baby.
That's right. That's right.
So, for folks who are just seeing that for the first time, you might be crying. I know that I came very close the first time that I watched that. It's a very powerful video. So, Randall, we'll start with you. What was your reaction to the win at Volkswagen, and how have folks that you talk to regularly in the plant reacted to that?
It was huge. It just showed us that the South can do it, that we can dream big. It's not only in North, we can reach our goals that the Northerns do. We can get paid just as much as them. Just because we live in the South don't mean we can dream and get it. And it made a very positive impact on our campaign. They've been through the same stuff that we have, but this time they didn't get fooled. And that's our crystal ball, and we're going to do the same thing they did. We're going to move that mountain, and we're going to get our union.
Jeremy, what about you?
Yeah, it showed people that it is possible. Because we looked up at Volkswagen and like there's something we talk about called the Alabama discount, and Chattanooga is not far from Alabama, and all these car companies that came in after Mercedes, each one paid less than the one before, had worse benefits than the one before, and that continued with Volkswagen. So in the past when we look up at Volkswagen, we were like, man, those guys have got to vote a union in, and they came close twice. So finally, on the third try, when you see that they were successful, then that's just proof that, it's not impossible. And so it gave our workers down here, those that had been putting in the work and talking to people, and they were like, man, it really can happen. So it definitely was a positive impact on us.
Right. Well, Jeremy, Randall, is there anything else that you think folks ought to know about this campaign? As voting begins on Monday, is there anything that you want to make sure you leave folks with before we let you go?
I think the whole world should know how Mercedes has been handling this campaign and stuff. They've been lying. They've been doing everything they can to prevent us from having our own union. They've been trying to persuade the votes. Of course, yesterday with a pastor walking around trying to persuade votes, giving this man a chance. They had their chance 20 years ago. Everything just deteriorated. And why now they want to act like they care about us? No, we're not going to be fooled this time. We're going to get our union.
All right, Jeremy, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I'd just say to anybody that sees your program, man, this campaign is even bigger than just Mercedes. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows what the Mercedes star is about and what it represents. And it's so much more important than even just the workers inside the Mercedes plant. So how can you, if you are sympathetic to our cause, how can you help? If you're a union member or somebody that supports unions and you know somebody that works at Mercedes, reach out to that person and encourage them to vote yes starting Monday evening. Vote yes, send a message, and after Mercedes votes yes, then we're going to get the rest of the state. People are not going to take advantage of Alabama workers anymore.
Hell yeah. Thank you so much, brothers, for both of you for what you're doing in this campaign, because you're exactly right. It's bigger than just you and your coworkers at Mercedes. It's something that impacts all of us as working people here in the South, and it's given us all as unionists a lot of hope and energy, seeing the organizing that's happening, seeing, like you said, it's possible with Chattanooga, and the progress you're making in Tuscaloosa, and then next Montgomery and on from there. So thank you both for all the hard work you're doing. I know you're spending a lot of extra time, having a lot of conversations, doing a lot of work on this, and so it's all going to be worth it. And the working people of Alabama stand with you.
Yep. Thanks for your time.
Thank y'all.
All right, folks. Jeremy and Randall from Mercedes out in Volkswagen, out in Tuscaloosa. Mercedes out in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, can't wait to celebrate next week. It's gonna be a big win.
Yeah.
Who knows what will happen with the 2024 general election and all that, but this election right here in the state of Alabama is gonna make waves. It's gonna have a lasting impact, and I'm excited to see where it goes. I feel really good about what's going to happen. I'll feel a lot better when we get the results, but
right.
It's going to be a monumental election, and I think if and when these brothers and sisters win this union, it's going to really, it's going to make waves throughout the state, throughout the South, and I think honestly globally. I think folks around the world will see workers in Alabama standing up to corporate power, and I think it will inspire a lot of people. So it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. It's it's one of the biggest things happening in the South right now. So kudos to all the folks who've been putting in that hard work. Kudos to the workers who are leading the way. Kudos to UAW for recognizing where maybe mistakes have been made in the past and where they could do better, and how they could better support these workers in helping facilitate their own leadership and their own militancy. So good work all around. And despite this massive opposition we're getting from politics and from the media and the corporate class, I'm hopeful when I hear Jeremy say that working people just aren't buying this crap, and so stay tuned.
Yeah, absolutely. So we 844-899 TVLR is the phone number. 844-899-8857 if you want to call in. The line is open for callers. So I wanted to talk about Bernie Sanders running for Senate again.
Really?
Yes.
That's interesting.
I do. I wanted to talk about that because, I'm not I would say I'm a Bernie Sanders fan. I voted for him in 2016 and 2020. And I think he's done a lot of good. I mean, probably the best senator in the U.S. Senate, which is, kind of a low bar, kind of like saying Biden is the best president. Maybe, certainly before this stuff happened in Israel and Gaza. But even then, it was a low bar. But still, he's done a lot of good. And the other day, he came out and said that he is running for re-election to U.S. Senate for Vermont. And so he's 82 years old, and that is going to put him at 88, 89 years old by the time that this term ends, if he's elected to another term, which, all indications are that he will be reelected. I don't know of any reason to suspect that anybody has a chance winning against Bernie in Vermont. And, there are particular reasons why it makes sense for Bernie Sanders to run again, being, as a socialist, as chair of the budget committee in the U.S. Senate, that has never happened before, and who knows when that's going to happen again. So, he occupies a really unique place with, some unique levers of power that if somebody else were to run, even if they had as good or better politics than Bernie, it would still be a net loss for the people of, America and the people of Vermont, because Bernie has so much more power in the Senate than somebody else coming in, even if they ostensibly had better politics. But, there is a problem that is demonstrated by his running for re-election, and that is a problem that organizers face and organizations and movements face in the United States and across the world, which is where you have a leader who either through charisma or through politicking or somehow has become the face of a movement that is very powerful and good and is doing good things and is accomplishing good things, but they cannot replace themselves. And that is the number one job of an organizer, is to replace yourself. And Bernie is not doing that right now. There's no indication that I can tell. Of course, who knows? I'm not in Vermont. Maybe if you're in Vermont, you can give us a call, 844-899-8857, and let us know. But I am not seeing Bernie's heir. I do not see an heir apparent to Bernie Sanders in Vermont. And that's a problem. That is a huge problem. And so, look, because of, in particular, his station in the United States Senate with the budget, with being budget chair and all of this, probably even if he had an heir, it would still make sense to run again and to continue occupying that space, just so that your office has those levers of power as opposed to somebody else. But he still needs somebody. He needs a lieutenant. He needs somebody, if he wins again in 2024, we should never, ever see Bernie Sanders by himself again, right? There's no reason at all that we should be seeing Bernie Sanders by himself. There's just no reason for it. Every time he is doing something, he should be opened for and somebody closing for him that is being trained to take over and to, at the very least, occupy that Senate space for Vermont, right? At the very least, ideally, you would have somebody, Bernie would have replaced himself as leader of the progressive movement. And you could make an argument that maybe he has done that to a certain extent with AOC or Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib, right? There's an argument that the reins have been passed or to the next generation insofar as generally the progressive movement. Bernie is at least not alone in being a leader of the left in the United States. But in Vermont specifically, and minimally, he needs to have a lieutenant. And this is something that, like I said, movements across the United States and across the world see. With Evo Morales in Bolivia, he did not have an obvious heir apparent, and that is why he had to fight the Constitution of Bolivia. And he did it through the proper channels. And I think that all of this about, election interference, and it came out to be true that all the allegations of election irregularities by Evo Morales were not substantiated. It was not substantiated that there were election irregularities or any sort of malicious anything going on from the MAS in Bolivia. There's no evidence of that. And there's no evidence of any foul play in Bolivia's Supreme Court overruling the term limits for the president. It's just that, in the same way that in the United States, the Supreme Court is politically appointed. The Supreme Court in Bolivia was politically appointed by AVO. They were AVO allies. And so, there was certainly, obviously, that played a part, right? Them being, saying that you have a human right to run for president, which, I think is kind of absurd on its face. But, whatever. You could make the argument. And they did make the argument, and they overturned it through the proper channels. And so AVO constitutionally could run, and he did, and he won, right? But he shouldn't have had to try to overturn that provision of the Constitution to run again, because he should have had a lieutenant. He should have had somebody that it was obvious that was going to be running after him. Same for Lula. He did not in Brazil. He did not have he did not have a lieutenant, somebody, an heir apparent that could run after him after he could not run in any more consecutive terms. They don't have like term limits per se in Brazil. They have consecutive term limits. And that's why Lula was able to run again and did and won again, right? But he shouldn't have had to do that, because he should have had an heir apparent in Brazil, and that person should be the president right now, right? So it's a real problem for unions, for movements, for parties, that you get this person that is that through by hook or crook or charisma or good politics or good organizing skills or whatever, finds themselves at the top of some movement or organization, and then whenever they either retire or they die or, for whatever reason they're no longer at the top, the movement, the organization crumbles. And that shouldn't happen. We need to be making a concerted effort to see that not happen, and Bernie needs to be making a concerted effort to see that not happen, and Bernie's circle needs to be doing that. That needs to be the project for U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders from 2025 to 2029 or to 2030, whenever his term ends. Get a lieutenant and never, ever, ever be seen without them. And so I don't know, but the question is then, how do you do that? I guess that's the question, and that's the problem, and it's a difficult thing to actually replace yourself. And so, Adam, I guess what are some like practical steps that people like Bernie or folks in our positions, obviously, us being in leadership positions in our unions and movements is just totally radically different from Bernie Sanders, but we do still have a responsibility to replace ourselves. And so what are some ways that leaders can replace themselves?
Well, first you have to want to, right? You have to, and that sometimes is distinct from politics. Someone can have quote unquote good politics that we may agree with. That doesn't mean they're not a narcissist or haven't, gotten that taste of power and don't really want to relinquish it. We see that happen a lot. You have folks who are dynamic leaders who help build organizations, right? But then they stay on too long. Right? The decades pass, and then all of a sudden you're like, we haven't made progress in a long time. And there's unions out there like that who've had, leadership in place for 20, 25, 30 years, sometimes longer.
Jimmy Hoffa, John Lewis, Walter Reuther.
Yeah. The Farm Workers Organizing Committee comes to mind. There's another one I read about recently where, a dynamic leader helped start the organization. You can respect their accomplishments, but that is distinct from their current leadership. And so you have to first want it. Just me personally, I'm always trying to ensure that I'm not the youngest or the oldest person in any given room, which is not always easy, but that's something that I think you have to be intentional about. You have to be really intentional about ensuring that you are building relationships with people, particularly those that you can mentor. Like if, to me, everyone should be mentoring folks. If you're serious about this movement, there should be people that you are kind of trying to bring along, that you're trying to educate, you're trying to build up. Part of this is getting those people in different capacities and different roles and positions, right? And so to be effective, you need allies anyway, right? So it's like it benefits you in a couple ways, right? You're building your allies to accomplish your goals, but these people are gaining experiences and sharpening their skills, and can then hopefully you can pass the torch to them. So yeah, I think being really intentional about building those relationships and making sure, you're not the youngest or the oldest person in any given room. That's huge. And not even necessarily age, that's a shorthand for it, but experience, right? Or any factor, right? You should not be on any given extreme there if you can help it. And being really intentional in training up those people. I think our movement, we do some stuff around training and leadership development, but we could do more. I really do think we could do a lot more. And I think, our term limits, sometimes, effective in that and helping in that. I think they can be. I'm always torn on that because, like, if the members want that person, right. Why should I throw up, bylaws that prevent the will of the membership? But at the same time, power becomes entrenched, and so you question just how much is it really the will, the real will of the membership, right? To elect this person for their 40th term. And so, yeah, sometimes structuring things so that you have to, right? Bernie doesn't necessarily have to have a successor because he can probably win his Senate seat, no question, and sit up there until the day he dies. If there were term limits, it would be forced upon you. And so that's something you have to think about, especially in terms of like your unions, your labor councils, your institutions that you have some direct influence over, weigh those pros and cons. And do you think it's necessary to have like those structural, procedures in place to ensure that there is like always some rotation? Because you want to be balanced. You don't want to always just flip out all your leadership and have like totally new people, right? And so it's usually good if you like kind of have staggered terms and can have a mixture of experiences. But yeah, it's a really big problem in our movement. And another one that comes to mind, we were kind of criticizing the Alabama Education Association this morning, AEA, and that is a great example of this phenomena because they had these powerful, dynamic leaders, Dr. Paul Hubbard and Dr. Joe Reed, each of whom, as young men, led their respective organizations, the Black Teachers Organization and the White Teachers Organization. They merged in 1969. They were a dynamic duo. And for the next, 40-ish years, were two of the most influential political figures in Alabama. I disagree with their politics. I disagree with their ideology and strategic approach and how to organize educators. But I can't, I have to acknowledge the extent of their success and influence throughout their leadership. But it came crashing down pretty much immediately after they retired. And, there was not a clear successor to Dr. Hubbard. You talk to older educators in this state, and some of them still revere the man like he was a saint. In kind of the way that some, older coal miners might look up to John O. Lewis. But there was not that clear succession. And it resulted in financial ruin. It resulted in membership losses. It resulted in political disaster. And so that is where you as a leader have to be cognizant of what will your final acts be and how will you be remembered. Because for all of, Dr. Hubbard's accomplishments, his final decision was his biggest mistake. And, the educators of Alabama are still paying for that. And so yeah, it's a really important phenomenon, and I'm glad you brought it up. Not that I'm following Bernie's campaign closely or anything of that nature. I didn't even know it was time for him to run for re-election in the Senate. But yeah, I think it's a really, it's a valid thing to point out, and it's something that we all have to be intentional about. And, this is not just for those of you who are older, right? This is for all of us. I am doing my best to engage with teenagers and kids in their 20s, right, to try to tap into the next generation, because I don't want to be the youngest or the oldest in any given room. I want to be able to build those bridges across generations and pass on experience and get people trained up. So yeah, we got to be intentional about it. It's a priority. It's a problem when it doesn't happen, and it's way too widespread.
And I think a couple other best practices might, one of the you said that about being intentional, and along with that, laying the groundwork for a decent amount of time is going to be one of the essential things, because in Bolivia, and for people who don't know what I'm talking about with Bolivia and Brazil, in both Bolivia and Brazil, there were very powerful, influential, and successful left-wing socialist labor parties, the MAS in Bolivia and the Workers' Party in Brazil, and they both accomplished a lot for their respective countries, working and peasant classes. And in Bolivia, what happened after Evo got that provision of the Constitution overturned and was allowed to run, and then he did run, and then he won. There were all these allegations of election irregularities. And so then at that point, he said, okay, fine. I won't, let's do another election, and I won't run this time if you're going to be so upset about it, right? That's what he did. And of course, by that time, the right wing and the fascist elements in Bolivia were able to foment enough support to say, no, we're not going to run an election right now. We're just going to take over the government as the right wing and the theocratic and the fascist elements, and we're going to get behind this Janine Áñez character. And then there was enough of a backlash to that elections were forced, and the person that was picked to run for the MAS was a Luis Arce, who had been in Evo Morales' cabinet, but he was not as charismatic as Evo. He did not have the unique and strong connections to the workers and peasants movements that Evo did. And, he was just kind of like a wonky character. And so he won ultimately, but he has not been able to keep the coalition together in the same way that Evo was. And there's a real rupture in Bolivia and some real concern that, and now the MAS is like dividing and people are being kicked out. And Luis Arce was actually kicked out of the MAS. And I think Evo is running again, isn't he, in Bolivia?
I'm not sure.
Something like that. But obviously, so there was ultimately a successor picked by the MAS and by Evo, but his rootedness in the movements were not strong enough, and apparently he had not been trained up or evaluated enough to see that this is not actually going to be a unifying person to have at the top of our government, to have at the top of our movement. And there's been real problems and real concern in Bolivia about the right-wing elements in Bolivia being able to take advantage of the split between the MAS and Luis Arce, and taking over government again. And in Brazil, there was a very similar dynamic where there was there was a person, an heir picked, but it was another kind of last minute thing. Lula, it was not a situation where for years Lula had been running around with this guy, and this guy is building up those relationships for years and a decade or more, right? It was a person that was kind of picked at the last minute to run because Lula was not going to be able to run again. And they even in the commercials, one of the things that I remember was like they had signs that you with a string, you turned them. And so on one side it says Lula, and then the other side it says Hernandez, and that was the guy that they picked. And so it was Lula, really trying to reinforce this, like, this is Lula's guy, right? But he didn't win. He lost to Bolsonaro, who's like a freak. And so, it can't, so being intentional is incredibly important, and doing it over a significant period of time. You cannot just in the months leading up to an election, or in the year, or in 2 years leading up to an election. You have to be like this, your lieutenant, your heir apparent, the person who's going to be coming up after you, especially if you are in a national leadership position, needs to be constantly by your side, learning from you and building the same relationships that you have, so that the relationships do not tear apart under their leadership, or they ultimately lose in an election because they were not able to solidify the continuation of a successful and popular program. Because even as Hernandez won, as Hernandez was picked by the Workers' Party to run, he lost. But even as he lost, Lula was polling ahead of Bolsonaro, and all indications are that if Lula had not been in prison, Lula would have won. But Lula was in prison, and he was barred from running again. And so, the being intentional is really important, and trying to, and as you're being intentional, spending a lot of time on it, building up people, and trying to evaluate their character and the degree to which they are going to be a good leader. Because sometimes some people are just not cut out to be a leader, right? I mean,
right.
That's true
it takes
too.
all types to be successful, and not all the people on your team are going to be that front-facing person. That's okay. Not everyone should be, or has to be, or can be that front-facing person. You need behind-the-scenes people too. You need the policy wonk person. But you also need the person with some, charisma.
Right.
And yeah, I think building a dynamic team that has diverse talents, and bringing them along your journey, and being, thinking ahead of, if you're winning your first term, you should be thinking about what happens 2 terms later when you can't run again. And that should be already in your mind before you even take power, right? Is how do we continue this power? Because that's a mistake we often make in the movement is, we win that one election, or we flip that one seat, and then lo and behold, things don't change too much when you look at it long term. And because often we didn't build the momentum and build lasting power. So yeah, I think sharing those relationships, like you said, is very important, because that happens a lot where stuff is so dependent on individual relationships and interpersonal connections, that it does the organization a disservice when that person fades away, that person is out of the picture for whatever reason. Because people get sick, people die, people change. I think there's a lot of danger when you're so dependent on, charismatic leaders. I'm not a big fan of that anyway. Not a big fan of hierarchy generally. And so I think we need leaders. I think it's hard to go completely horizontal and not have any defined leaders at all. I mean, because people will step into that void.
Right.
And maybe not the ones you want, but I think there's a lot of danger with that. And so, even now thinking about Sean Fain at the UAW, that's something I would hope he is doing and thinking about, and what kind of team he's building, and what kind of long-lasting impact they can have even past his presidency. I mean, I think that's something that you have to really think about and be intentional with.
Yeah. Moving on to a different topic, women in the trades, women in the construction trades is a really important thing. There are obviously a lot of barriers to women being able to get construction jobs and being able to maintain construction jobs. And so there has been a push from companies in the trade and construction industry, from unions in the trade and construction industry, from the government and all. So one of those things was recently an initiative announced by Maine Governor Janet Mills about, so that is announcing this new program that Maine is going to have. So I want to play this clip, and then I want to see if you can guess why it came across my Twitter feed. So let's go ahead and play this clip from Janet Mills.
Governor Mills signing an executive order at Maine DOT in Augusta alongside female leaders in Maine's construction industry. The executive order will kickstart data collection in collaboration with partners in the construction industry and implement grant programs to incentivize the hiring of women, while providing supportive services that recruit and retain women in the construction industry.
There are qualified women across Maine who belong in fields dominated by men, and I want to knock down the barriers that are keeping them from pursuing these good-paying jobs in construction with good Maine employers.
There's already some work being done across the state to invite women to work in construction. Associated General Contractors of Maine helps run career day events for teens and a registered pre-apprenticeship through Maine Construction Academy.
This year, as we reviewed the applications, we had almost 30% of our participants were female this year, which is a significant improvement over what we've seen for construction industry participation in the past.
Laura LeBove owns her own construction company called Sopo Cottage. She helps organize volunteer opportunities called Women Build Day through Habitat for Humanity. It gives women an opportunity to gain hands-on experience in construction.
We have women of all different experience levels, but many are novices. They've never held a drill, they've never held a saw, and we teach them how to do that as part of the build day, and they get to experience it firsthand. They come in the morning being very, very hesitant, and by the end of the day, they are just really into it and really having a good time.
So that seems like a good program to me, and really exciting, so I don't, what are your thoughts about the program?
I noticed they talked to the owners, the Association of Contractors. They talked to an individual who owned a construction company. They even went so far as to talk about a pre-apprenticeship program and things like that. But I never once heard mention of the trade unions. They said that the contractors have like a career day or some sort of outreach to the schools. But yeah, I heard no mention of the trade unions, the Trades Council, any of their apprenticeship programs. So I think that's interesting because, yeah, I totally agree. We need more support to get women in the trades. I think there are a lot of women out there who could do fabulous work in these industries and maybe don't know about the opportunity or don't think the opportunity is right for them.
Right.
I was really proud doing these school visits for the Labor Council over the last couple of weeks. We ran into a few young ladies who were going into building trades unions, the millwrights in particular. So I was really excited to hear that because I think it'll be great for them. But yeah, so that was my biggest takeaway is like, you couldn't find a union to talk to. You didn't.
Right.
I mean, they didn't talk to they didn't talk to like an actual woman in the trades. They talked
to women who supervise women in the trades.
Right. They talk to bosses. And so, I mean, that's not uncommon for local media. That's what they do. They don't talk to regular people typically. Unless it's like after a tornado or something and they're trying to get your hot take. But typically these sort of segments, they go straight to industry. So that was my frustration with it. I applaud some of the spirit behind it for sure. It sounds like there's maybe some good things in this program. But yeah, I mean, same thing with like Go Build Alabama here in Alabama and all this stuff. I mean, yes, we need more people in the trades. It's obvious there is, a need to replenish that workforce. A lot of folks are aging out. Folks age out of that industry quicker than other industries because there's just only so long you can do it to your body in most cases. So, yeah, I recognize the need. We need more people. We need a diverse talent pool that's going into it. But yeah, you gotta work with the folks who are there, and the building trades unions have an established record of success.
Well, that's a rational take. I did also notice that, and I think it was frustrating, but that is not why it crossed my Twitter feed. It was tweeted out by a Twitter account called End Wokeness.
Oh.
End Wokeness.
Okay.
And,
I think I know where this is going.
So End Wokeness says, Maine Governor Mills just signed an executive order to make the construction industry more inclusive for women. She believes the construction industry is dominated by men due to sexist barriers.
Well, she didn't quite say all that.
Right. But as if, and the implication is that apparently there's no sexism in the trades, which I was not aware of. My understanding was that the trades were pretty stereotypically sexist, actually. That was kind of my understanding, but apparently not. Apparently there are no sexist barriers in the trades anymore. Elon Musk replied to this tweet in agreement, saying, "This is insane." Another one with a bunch of blue checks in the replies here, if you can believe that. This fellow saying, "This is robbing citizens of their taxpayer funds." Wow. Yeah. So men are not keeping women out. Women don't usually want to get their hands dirty. That's the only reason that women are not working in the trades. They don't want to get their hands dirty. Wow. And here's another one. Now we're going to see construction companies with cement trucks and forklifts hitting every curb. That's a unique take there. Liberalism is a mental disorder. How long until buildings in Maine start to collapse? How many women have called discrimination for not working in the construction industry? Not totally sure exactly. I think they were having some grammar issues with that one. So that's basically the consensus on in the replies of End Wokeness is that sexism has been solved in the trades, and this is unnecessary. So.
Right, but just don't pay attention to those comments. If you do believe sexism is over in that industry, read no further. Lest you be confused.
Yes.
And
so we have somebody, Pam Demonia, in the comments, 18-year woman in the trades in the IBEW, in a trade union, which we love. Pam Demonia, if you want to call in and
let us know what it's like.
Let us know whether or not End Wokeness is correct, that sexism is no longer a thing in the trades, because that was not my understanding. But apparently that is the consensus between End Wokeness and Elon Musk. Obviously that's silly, and the stereotype is the stereotype for a reason, because obviously if you have a place that is almost 100% men, that it's not that unlikely that you're going to see sexist attitudes start to rise up, in particular as it relates to the industry and the trade. And so it does actually have to be explicitly and intentionally combated when you do have these sexist attitudes so deeply rooted in the workforces, even among trade unions, right? And that's why the National Association of Building Trades Unions are making a concerted effort at the national level and then all the way down to push back against some of these sexist attitudes and to open the way for women in the trades. Because no doubt some of the reason that there are fewer women in the trades is because of the physicality of the work and all that kind of stuff. But to believe that is the only reason that women do not work in the trades is just to be so far removed from the reality, and you just don't work with, you're just not in contact with working people, right? I mean, you're not in contact with women in the trades. You're not, because they would dispel this myth for you very quickly. And you're not in contact with men in the trades, because if you talk to a lot of men in the trades, they would also dispel that myth for you. But unintentionally. Right. So,
right.
you know, it's such a silly thing to believe.
Right. And the idea that, like, oh, if we let the women in there, the quality will suffer.
Right.
I mean, what the hell is
Which
that
is,
kind of
you know, I
garbage?
mean, like, no doubt, there is still a lot of physically demanding work being done in the trades, but due to automation and the tools that we have today, it is less and less the case, actually, that you need big, rippling muscles to work in the trades.
Well,
right?
and, you know, I work as a stagehand with IATSE, which is a trade union. It's not part of the building trades, obviously, but it's, you know, it's manual labor. It can be very hard work, and I work alongside quite a few women who can outpush that box against me most days. I'm just a scrawny little fella, and you know, there's a lot of women that I work with that, you know, I totally trust to carry the other load. You know, I trust to work alongside who, you know, kick ass and do great work. And so, yeah, it's a very narrow-minded perspective to think that sexism is not still prevalent in a lot of workplaces, but yeah, in particular these, you know, men-dominated workplaces. It's absolutely a factor. It's a factor into why, you know, women don't want to go into it. It's a factor into why some women will leave the profession, right? Because they get in and deal with a bunch of harassment and nonsense, and it's not worth it. And those are things our unions, and to your point, our unions have to be intentional about that. And I don't care if it's called wokeness or not. You can't. It's always the right time to do the right thing, and it doesn't matter what people call it. You know, if people want to say, "Oh, well, the damn electrical workers have gone woke on us," well, so be it, right? Because you've got to do the right thing. And that means respecting everyone, regardless of who they are, where they come from, what they are, and ensuring that everybody can be successful, free of harassment, free of any kind of bullshit. People don't deserve that. Let people do what they need to do to earn a living and provide for their family. And it takes diversity to really strengthen your team. I mean, to your point earlier about, you know, Bernie and the organizing and all that, you got to have a diverse team, and that's diversity in all of its aspects. And so we need women in the trades. Women need those opportunities because there are plenty of women who don't want to go to college, who would like to have a good career with a pension, who may want to travel to different job sites all over the country, right? And for all those reasons, a building trades apprenticeship program and, you know, becoming a full-fledged member is really a good option for them.
Right. Yeah, and, you know, even beyond the sexist attitudes and harassment and stuff that women are going to face in a lot of trade industry jobs, which I do think, you know, you're just kind of silly and deluded and again, not in touch with the experiences of working people if you believe that this is a totally solved problem. But we are making progress, and there are, you know, fewer and fewer workplaces accept this kind of thing as a standard, you know, operating procedure. It's still a problem, but even besides that, you know, the kind of intentional and blatant and gross type of sexism that is the stereotype, there are barriers, you know, like kind of physical type barriers, you know, the lack of maternity leave in some trade jobs, the lack of the ability to, flexibility in a work schedule, the ability to take time off to take care of a child when they need it, the grueling schedules that people in the trades typically have to face, you know, working 6-7 days a week, working a lot of overtime, having to, work in different locations. There are accommodations that you could make to the working conditions that would make it easier for women to be able to acquire and maintain these types of positions that are beyond the kind of gross type of harassment type of sexism. Those are just things that you could do to accommodate to women to make it easier for them to acquire and retain these jobs. And if you do that, that is not, making those accommodations is not making provision for mediocrity or saying that, oh, even if you're a bad worker, if you're a woman, then we're going to keep you. It's just making provision for the special situations of a worker's life so that they can continue to come to the job and be on the job and perform well, right? Having childcare has no bearing on are they a good worker or are they not, or this kind of stuff. It's just making provision for people's life circumstances, so that's just another lots of reasons that women would not be in the trades. Gross, blatant harassment and sexism being one of them, of course, but also the lack of accommodations on these jobs and around these jobs.
Which on that subject, something that just came to my mind is, building trades unions could come together and help start childcare co-ops. I mean, if we really want to get into it and find ways to recruit and retain women into these professions, that could be an option as well. How are you addressing childcare?
Right.
And I know it's difficult. They have lots of contractors they work with, right? It's not the same as like UAW and their one big contract with Ford, right? It's different. I get that. So think outside the box. And are there ways, to make progress there and maybe get some contributions from these contractors to fund a childcare center that would be, open for your members and their families. Things like that. I think our unions have to be creative about that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. We do have a caller on the line. We'll go ahead and bring them on the air from on the air from a 256 area code. I think I know who this is. 256 area code. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Joe, man. This is Joe over in Decatur, man.
Hey, Joe. What's on your mind?
Comment on a couple things right quick. Women in the workforce. When I started in a major industry back in the mid-'70s, no women was actually out in the plant working, with the exception of the secretarial pool. Mm-hmm. As they hired more, I remember some of the very first ones that came into the plant. They could hold their own with any of the men that worked there, and probably had it in their mind that they had to prove that they could. But yeah, they was good workers as anybody ever seen. But what I really seen out of them as time went by and the women increased in the demographic out there, some of our best union members happened to be women. You could count on them on a regular basis. They wanted to be involved. They wanted their voice to be heard, and most of the women I worked with had more nads than the men when you get right down to it. But I get off that real quick. I just wanted to mention a couple of things about the legislative session, and Adam, of course, said just what I would, that thank goodness it's over. On the 231 bill that Arthur Orr proposed and got passed, something people ought to think about. Now that we're going to live with that for at least another year, and it'll probably never get changed, why not give an incentive to unions when they do win a secret ballot election, to give them some incentives, such as maybe state can afford to build Mercedes a plant and Hyundai and everybody else. Build them a union hall somewhere when they win. Pay their negotiating committee while they're negotiating contracts, because that's really who's improving workers' lives in Alabama. One more thing, I'll let you go. They got their school choice bill passed. Of course, we knew that was probably coming. But it's kind of funny that that was all about choice. Got to have a choice. Well, they don't give the general public the choice of voting on a gambling bill. They don't do that. They They don't give the public the choice of automatic recognition and organizing. I mean, they don't give them that choice. It's just kind of funny that they'll give you a choice on one thing, so they say, but then limit your choices on everything else. One more thing, and this is just really quick. I did see a bill that somebody had proposed. Don't know the number of the bill and don't remember who proposed it, but it was a bill to have a tax-free weekend a couple of times a year in Alabama. So basically sporting goods, outdoor goods, wouldn't be taxed if you purchased them on that weekend. Now that's kind of crazy to me right there. But their reasoning for it was, we want to get some people outside doing some outside activities like kayak and fishing and so forth, so on. Well, more power to you if you want to do that. I'm glad for you. But I tell you what, why don't they, when they got people that they have to encourage to go outside, why don't they flip it around and give the homeless a weekend in a motel with a hot shower, you know, a couple of times a year? Because them's the exact opposite. Them folks would like to get inside for a little while. But I'll leave it at that, y'all. Good show today, and I appreciate it.
Hey, appreciate
Thanks,
it,
Joe. Appreciate you, brother. Yeah, always interesting tax credits and tax holidays. And, you know, we were following one bill that Arthur Orr was pushing, and it was a decent one, actually, the one that would have removed sales tax on menstrual products and baby products, and that one did not pass, unfortunately. But yeah, I wasn't aware of the sporting goods one. That's pretty funny. There was also a bill that we need to dive deeper into regarding Alpha Insurance. It was told to me as the Alpha Disneyland bill. So that one sounds real interesting. We'll definitely need to take a look at that. Yeah, there was so much that happened this legislative session, and then there was so much that didn't happen, right? I was hoping for some criminal justice reform, and there was very little movement there to address the massively broken criminal justice system that we have in this state. I mean, we've got one of the highest incarceration rates on planet Earth. We've got this massive system of, let's just call it convict lease labor, allegedly convict lease labor. I guess I could clarify, but you know, it's the subject of litigation. The Department of Justice has determined that our prison systems are unconstitutional. Like right now, as I'm talking, they're violating the Constitution of everyone inside. Not really anything notable on this. You know, and so a lot of, and I think Joe's point was right on, that, you know, they're very selective in choice.
Right.
They love to use rhetoric around choice for certain things, but they're not consistent with that across the board. Not that we should expect any of these politicians to be consistent with much of anything, except for opposing us. But yeah, that's a really good point. You know, you're going to have choice to use public school dollars to fund a private school education, but workers will not have one of the only two choices they have to get a union. You got two options, and we just took one of them away. What kind of choice is that? And yeah, you know, gambling, you know, I don't care a whole lot one way or the other about gambling personally. It's not something I'm really all that interested in, but I respect that people ought to have the right to make that decision. It shouldn't be that hard to allow folks to vote on it. To me, it shouldn't be that hard. Let folks choose. I mean, hell, have a ballot that says, do you want sports gambling? Yes or no. Do you want casinos? Yes or no. Do you want lottery? Yes or no. And we just roll with the results, right? And I mean, I'm torn on it because I see where gambling is not good, frankly, for society. And I'm concerned about the way gambling is now so mainstream in sports. I mean, you watch sports nowadays, and that's all it's about is gambling. And that's that's kind of shocking from where we were just a few years ago, where like
Yeah,
you could
it
not
really
talk about it on ESPN and the Sunday night football game. It was not something to really be mentioned, but now it's so integrated into it. And so, I'm not a cultural conservative, but I see that gambling has its detrimental impact on society, and not necessarily the greatest way to fund government. But that said, Alabama raises the lowest amount of revenue in the country, or at least the second lowest, depending on which state, which year you look at. We need revenue to fund like bare minimum basic services. I mean, that's why, we spend so much of our legislative session year in, year out fighting for what is already the status quo in like half the damn country. We're fighting for things like summer EBT and Medicaid expansion and things that are well established in other states. Programs that are already benefiting our fellow Americans in other states, and in large part programs that we pay taxes into, right? Federal programs. So yeah, I had a lot of frustrations with this legislative session. And one thing that came really close that I was glad to see at least made progress was the paid parental leave for state and education employees. It did not get through this year, but it made a lot more progress than I've ever seen it make. In fact, it has hardly been in the conversation for years. It's something that I've been really passionate about, especially since the birth of my daughter 8 years ago, and seeing firsthand, how the lack of parental leave for teachers impacted our family, and how many years it took for my wife to rebuild her sick leave time and all that. It's an issue that I think can be won on, and hopefully the education folks will kind of regroup after some tough losses this year. Right. They didn't get much. They got essentially a pay cut because their raise is less than inflation. They didn't get anything for retirees. Yes, the budget is a record budget. It's bigger. It's got some important investments in there. That's all true and fair. But they lost big on school choice, and they lost big on DEI and divisive concepts. That's another one we didn't mention this morning, but let's not forget that was passed. And there are universities in the state right now going through audits of their departments to figure out what will be compliant and uncompliant with this new law. Right. And if people are going to have to lose their jobs over this, right? You're talking about banning DEI, and you've got entire departments named DEI. And so, we've got people who may lose their jobs over that. And the divisive concepts part of the law is, essentially trying to criminalize teaching the truth. For all the rhetoric around it, that's bottom line. They want to make it harder to teach factual information that they don't like. That's it. And, teaching American history without getting into divisive concepts, I just don't know how you do that.
Right.
How do you talk about the journey of the United States of America without getting into divisive concepts, without talking about race, without talking about gender, without talking about class? I don't see how you do it, right? And I think this is meant to scare teachers. I think it's meant to instill fear. It's meant to instill self-censorship. It's not so much that I envision, people reading through everyone's lesson plans with a fine-tooth comb. I think it's more to scare the folks into censoring themselves. And then now, they will have leverage if they find some teacher that's out there, God forbid, teaching, the truth about American history and race relations and things of that nature. Well, now they're going to punish them and go after them. And, so that's really, really concerning. That's a major loss on the education front. So, I'd like to see the education groups really rally, try to see what they can do to undo some of this damage from this legislative session, but then also push forward on getting paid family and parental leave that's a huge benefit that all state employees and educators need. It's all workers need paid parental leave. But in particular, you're talking about a profession that's majority female, and a profession that directly deals with the academic and intellectual development of children. So if anyone should know how beneficial it is for children to stay home with their parents right after birth, it's educators. So, those are a few. Yeah, Joe prompted me to have a few more takeaways on the legislative session. Yeah, there's I think we may do some more reflections, as we go throughout the summer and kind of dig into some of these bills. I want to go back to the child labor bill. Let's see, how exactly was that final version written. There's going to be some fallout with SB 1, the absentee voting rights bill, because that's also going to be litigated for sure. And I believe SB 231, the anti-union bill, will be litigated as well. So those will be, to be determined how they will impact us. But all in all, it just speaks to the need for a mass movement of working class people in the state of Alabama, because that is something that we're missing. We have had progress in this state from time to time. It hasn't been long lasting or always by any means, because for the vast majority of the history of our state, we've been dominated by wealthy, powerful interests. Today, it's people like the Business Council of Alabama. But, 200 years ago, it was the slave owners. We've long been dominated by a clique of wealthy, powerful interests. And where we've made progress is when we've had diverse people power rise up against that, when white and black unite, when men and women unite, when Christians and non-Christians come together. Because in Alabama and in the South in particular, like, that has been the long-lasting model, is to keep the working people divided and conquered, along racial lines and nationality and immigration lines and gender and religion and all of these things. And what scares them the most is when ordinary, everyday working people unite across this diversity and come together and see our common interests, because we all want better lives. We all want, to be treated with respect. We all want to be able to take care of our families and retire with dignity and go home safely and, leave our kids in a better position than we started. Those are all things that we all feel. And it's increasingly difficult in Alabama to achieve those things. And the only way we're going to make progress is going to be that mass movement of working people, to put so much pressure on these politicians that we start to win, and we won some things this year, and I don't want to detract from that. Every year, as bad as things are in the legislature, good people are able to get some good stuff done, and good people are able to keep some bad stuff from happening. Mm-hmm. And that only happens with a lot of people's hard work, but it's going to take a whole lot more of it. Obviously, we look at the results of this year, and it's going to take a whole lot more to start really winning for working people and to start defeating some of this terrible legislation that is meant to entrench corporate power at our expense, or that is meant to divide us and to, attack marginalized communities. So those are some of my takeaways. I think we can do much, much better. We deserve much, much better. I think most of the legislators should be ashamed of themselves and what they have done and what they have to report back to their constituents. I was disappointed in how my legislators were completely unresponsive. And that is something I heard from a lot of people. I talked to a lot of folks about contacting their legislators, and a whole lot of them had the same experience I had, which is no response. Won't answer your phone call, won't return your voicemail, won't answer your email. You send them 6, 7, 8 emails, you still don't get an answer. You talk to their secretary, still don't get an answer. You visit their office, you still don't get an answer. So it's going to take a lot of work starting now. From now until the beginning of the next legislative session, we've got to get in their face. And these representatives and senators, we have to talk to as many of them as possible, and we have to put more pressure on them. They have to feel some pressure from working people in the community, because right now they don't. They think they can get away with it. They think they can do whatever they want to unions, whatever they want to minorities, whatever they want to the poor and to the working class, and they think they can get away with it. So it's going to be up to us to change that equation.
Yep. All right, folks, that is going to be it for us today. Appreciate everybody tuning in. We're gonna have a good show for you next week, so make sure you tune in. Subscribe on Facebook, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. You can subscribe to our newsletter at tvlr.fm. You can make a one-time or recurring monthly contribution at tvlr.fm/donate. Appreciate everybody's time, and look forward to talking to you next week.
Oh, well, before we wrap, I've got plugs, man.
All right. Tell us the plugs.
Don't forget about the Solidarity for the Working Class Party happening this evening in Hoover, Alabama. That is through More Perfect Union, 4 to 6 p.m. At the brewery there in Hoover. Let's see the name of that one. It is the Brock's Gap Brewing Company in Hoover. And again, the Alabama AFL-CIO, Machinist Lodge 291, and CWA 3902 have all gone in on this with More Perfect Union. There will be stuff for the kids. It's a family-friendly event. There will also be adult beverages should you want some. But food, fun, a way to celebrate the UAW's campaign and show your solidarity with them. So if you're available, stop by there this afternoon. Also wanted to mention, I forgot this in the main show, but Dr. Barber, Reverend William Barber, is coming to Montgomery on Monday, the 13th at 7 o'clock, also to support the UAW. It's going to be a Poor People's Campaign Moral Monday kind of event in solidarity with UAW workers organizing, particularly in the Montgomery area at Hyundai, who are facing a lot of opposition from the company and from anti-forces, looking for a lot of community support. So if you are in the Montgomery area Monday evening, a good chance to show your support and solidarity, connect with these folks, support the Poor People's Campaign and the UAW, and hear Dr. Barber speak. I'm a big fan of Reverend Barber. Been following his work for a few years. And also wanted to mention that Labor Notes has some good workshops going on. They have their race and labor workshop coming up. That's going to be on May 23rd and May 30th. It's a two-parter, and so they're asking you to attend both parts if you can. But I really recommend that one. It's a good workshop. Ties right in with some of the topics we talked about today. And on May 15th, they're going to have Thinking Like an Organizer. That's their stewards workshop. And so this is, for stewards and people who work closely with stewards, like elected officers. But it's really, really good stuff on how to think more like an organizer as a shop steward. So like how to use grievances, right, to become organizing tools, to engage not just the member with the grievance, but your whole bargaining unit, your whole union even. So those are really good workshops. Go to labornotes.org/events to check that out. And then, one final plug for the Alabama Arise legislative preview or legislative wrap-up. Again, that's going to be on the 28th at 6 p.m. And you can go to Alabama Arise's website and find more information there. You'll also can find it on Facebook and all that good stuff as well. So quite a few events coming up. Oh, and on June 10th, I will be doing another Unions 101 webinar with our friend Jennifer Shearer from the Economic Policy Institute. If you missed our Unions 101 for Sweet Home Alabama, if you missed that this spring, we're doing a redo, this time for the League of Women Voters on June 10th. And even though the League of Women Voters is putting the event together, it is open to the public, so folks can check that out as well. So lots of ways to learn more, lots of ways to connect with folks and build community. So those are my plugs. Appreciate everyone tuning in and all your support. Keep supporting us, keep liking, sharing, subscribing, giving us good reviews. All that stuff really does help. And tell your union siblings and your coworkers, your friends and neighbors. Tell them about our program and our project and what we're trying to accomplish. Because the bosses have media, we need media too.
All right. With that, we'll see you next week.